Okay, I'd like to call the August 22nd County Commissioners meeting to order. Any announcements?
Just a reminder that this commission meeting is being video and audio recorded.
Is there any public comment? No. Any new business? None. A motion for the approval of the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And a motion for the approval of payroll and treasury warrants?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any commissioners' reports or comments?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think I nailed that one.
Done in 45 seconds. Well done. Okay, we'll call to order the Select Board meeting for August 22nd, 2018. For the acceptance of the agenda, we have one change in consent items, number 5. We're going to table that, take that at a future date. Announcements, Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, a reminder that this meeting is being audio and video recorded. For the second announcement, I would ask that Sergeant Marshall of the Nantucket Police Department come down to read a proclamation regarding Suicide Prevention Week. Thank you, Sergeant.
Good afternoon. I just want to thank the Select Board for acknowledging September 9th through the 15th as Suicide Prevention Week. Part of my duties as a police officer here is also co-chairing for the Cape and Island Suicide Prevention Coalition. This is a very near and dear subject just because it's such a small island and we have been impacted in such a way that to have the board acknowledge this week is very important for the community. So I'm just going to read it and then I'll get out of here. Whereas in the United States, one person dies by suicide every 12 minutes and 121 people die by suicide each day. And whereas 20 veterans die by suicide each day. And whereas suicide is the second leading cause of death for Massachusetts residents aged 15 to 44, and the suicide rate on Cape Cod and the islands is 1.4 times higher than the rest of the state. Whereas suicide is a tragic and disruptive event for families and communities, it is estimated that annually there are 6.3 million suicide loss survivors who have lost a loved one to suicide. And whereas suicide is a public health issue and a community concern, and through increased education and awareness of the issue, a great number of suicides can be prevented. Therefore, we do hereby officially designate the week of September 9th through the 15th, 2018 as Suicide Prevention Week in the town and county of Nantucket. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Thank you, Sergeant Marshall. Just a reminder that town offices will be closed on Monday, September 3rd in observance of Labor Day. That means summer is over. And finally, the next select board meeting is on Wednesday, September 12th. That is the end of our summer schedule. That is it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I think there's another week and a half of summer.
Oh, we're done.
It's not getting there. Is there any public comment here tonight that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'm not aware of any new business. Approval of minutes and payroll warrants.
So,
Sure.
so moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approval of treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Pending contracts. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Did you want to go over anything, Greg?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. That motion passes. All right, on to consent items. Number 1, this is the second to last item for the grand swap. Number 1. Then we have 2, 3, 4, and 6.
Can we make a motion on all?
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes, I believe unanimously. Citizen Department request. Gordon Fraser requests for approval of transfer of aquaculture license to McLean Wraith for 1515A and 15B head of harbor. This is a total of 10 acres. I think Jeff's going to get here, come just give us a quick intro, maybe a recommendation.
Absolutely. Good evening. Jeff Carlson, Natural Resources Coordinator for the town. The town administers the aquaculture program in conjunction with the Division of Marine Fisheries. One of the provisions that the regulation allows for is for a current leaseholder to transfer that lease to another eligible individual, as they're either, they want to terminate their aquaculture career, don't have time to manage that lease effectively. It's kind of just more of like a managerial change. Gordon Fraser has 10 acres, 8 of which are in the head of the harbor site, which are highlighted in yellow here. And then if you scroll down one more, and then he has 2 acres in the head of the harbor Cascada entrance site as part of his overwintering portion there. He is wishing to transfer that to McLean Wraith. Mac has been working on other aquaculture leases now for about 3 years, and we feel that he's an extremely qualified individual to take these leases over and would recommend that this transfer go through.
Any questions or comments?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That motion passes. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you guys.
Just nice that there's somebody there to pick it up. It doesn't go. Okay, number 2, Holidays for Heroes. Request for waiver of town noise bylaw from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. for the American Dream Gala to be held Saturday, September 8th, 2018 at the Boys and Girls Club.
I make a
Motion
motion
to-
to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. Harbor Fuel Oil Corporation request for Island Gas to take title under IRS Section 1031 to 11 Industry Road for bulk fuel storage facility. Any question? Oh, sorry.
Is there someone here to present this?
I don't see anybody here from Harbor Fuel.
Okay. I guess my question was, this is a beneficial tax exchange to the parties. And these were parties that the town had engaged in a negotiation for some real estate in the past, that this may or may not have been, contemplated by the parties at that time. And I wonder if this should be something that the board should consider in executive session, because it has a financial benefit to the parties that we entered into a real estate transaction with.
For me, my take on it was just a, or I guess, let me ask you, Dawn, you know a little bit about this. Could they do this after? They have to do this now beforehand, right?
There are a couple of different ways to set up a 1031, but I think that they just Island Gas and my understanding is Island Gas and Harbor Fuel are essentially the same company now. But there's a piece of property that's in Island Gas's name that they are selling, and they want to use an intermediary to just transfer that money into the purchase of this. It's a pretty standard practice, and I'm not concerned with it.
I'm not concerned. I've done the same myself. You're avoiding capital gains and you're pushing your capital gains.
You're deferring.
You're deferring till you sell the second one. So I think I'm not that concerned. I don't know if it would. I don't think it would have. I don't think it would have influenced my decision on the prior. I was more worried about ensuring they moved the tank farm. But so I'm willing to vote for it.
Any thoughts, Rita?
No, I thought it was fairly clear. I don't have the same background on some of the real estate negotiations that we've had previously, but I thought the issue itself seemed pretty straightforward. So.
Yeah, it's a valid point Jim makes.
Yeah, my issue wasn't pro or con. It was just where we had the conversation, because it can be complicated, and there are all kinds of 1031 exchanges. But that's obviously that's the will of the board.
Okay. Comments or motion?
I'd make a motion to approve it.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those against?
No.
Okay, it's 4-1, passes. Okay, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, request for expenditure of funds for potential real estate acquisition. Is Mr. Sully here? There he is. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Brian Sullivan. I'm the chairman of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I am here to ask for authorization for the ability to be able to negotiate on properties above the $100,000 spending cap that we are working within with the Board of Selectmen at this point, so that we can then bring vetted opportunities to the board with a offer to purchase subject to board approval. So ultimately, we can move at a quicker pace to get us to a place to be able to negotiate, is what the authorization is for. It is not for an actual expenditure at this time. It's for authorization to be able to negotiate.
So this would essentially allow you to be able to enter into a contingent agreement on a piece of property as they become available, rather than waiting what could be weeks to a month for us to meet in executive session. to discuss it.
That would
And
be-
then we would discuss it in executive session after and potentially need to take it to town meeting.
That would be correct. The terms of any opportunity that we had to negotiate on would give the first board, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the ability to start the process without coming to SB for approval to begin, but ultimately SB would have to approve anything that we brought to the table. This came about because we've seen opportunities that we haven't been able to react nimbly to because of the steps in the process. So.
That's what I was going to ask. What's the hurdle? What problem are we solving? And that you just answered it.
Yeah, it basically the problem we're trying to solve for is the ability to participate in the free market before things move on to other opportunities.
I think Jim.
Do you have does someone have the language about what the $100,000 limit is? In my recollection, it's for the expenditures of over $100,000. It's not to enter into negotiations. Do we have the language for that?
Would it be to free up deposit funds, I believe, to put money down at onto a purchase and sale agreement?
Subject to
Board approval with-
or town meeting if it needed funding.
Okay, well, that's a little different than a contingent. That's not a little different than what he said earlier. So it's a little,
I was just trying to clarify.
No, I know. To me, it goes back to it's a real estate transaction. I think to have a conversation with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in an executive session meeting to talk about all these things, I think would be helpful personally, rather than getting into but that's just my, I was told there was a specific property that was being considered. That was what I was communicated to by town manager. And I guess that's not the case.
There is a property that was of interest, and it came up in the fact that the hands were tied in terms of timing.
And
Okay. But there isn't a property now.
We don't know. I
Oh,
don't know.
Okay.
I can ask.
So there could be an opportunity for us to
Right.
discuss an individual property in executive session.
Yeah.
The impetus for me standing here today is the recognition that to get us to that place, to schedule an executive session with this board and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board, we may need to act more quickly to get us to that table and then be subject to that conversation.
this is something as well that has come up every single time we've looked at a piece of property. So this is one that
Right.
really triggered the conversation where when we're looking at what are the constraints are on the trust to be able to take up opportunities that are in the free market, this is one of the major obstacles that we can't really begin these discussions having that $100,000 as the limit until we go through a month-long process, which, as you know, with property doesn't always work very well. So this is something that has been identified as we're working through our strategic plan as one of our major constraints as well. So this would apply to any of the properties that came up.
I have one question, and maybe somebody here on the board, or Brian can answer it, or Mr. Turbot. What are the safeguards? What is the taxpayer money? What's the safeguards that there's oversight?
So ultimately, any transaction where the monies would be spent would be subject to the SB approval. So we're not asking not to have the SB approval. We're just asking to be able to negotiate subject to the SB approval. Does that make sense? So we're asking, yes, at the $100,000 limit, it can become difficult to participate in the marketplace. So if we have the ability to negotiate, then come to the SB in executive session and say, these are the plans, these are the intentions. Is this a deal that SB wants? Do any of these terms need to be renegotiated? Then we have that opportunity, and because they're deposit funds, they would be subject to that approval. So if the seller were willing to accept that contingency, that would be the only way we would enter the contract. Then we could walk from the contract if the safeguard being the SB's ultimate decision didn't approve.
And that would normally
And
be an executive session.
The funds would be written as refundable if the approval was not granted.
Correct.
Jim?
So, and this is your business, but in my limited experience in real estate, typically deposits are 10,000, 5,000. You know, obviously I'm not, buying tens of millions of dollars of property, but is that $100,000 really a financial constraint at this time in terms of a deposit, which is certainly less than a purchase and sale agreement, 10% down?
It's not the deposit that I'm basically looking for the approval. It would be the purchase price. Because up to now, funds after $100,000 are restricted. So we need to be able to have a discussion about funds over $100,000, which would be the purchase price of the property, subject to that SB's approval. That's my understanding, that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund can make decisions and spend up to $100,000. A dollar above that comes to this board for approval. So
Yeah.
while it's the same thing, as long as they're subject to negotiations, as written, negotiations finalized in the purchase and sale agreement are subject to the board and town of Nantucket approval.
But if the seller might want you to enter into a purchase and sale agreement prior to it actually coming to us in terms of detailing it more, where 10% could be on a $2 million purchase, it's $200,000. So you may need to not have those funds encumbered. Am I thinking of this correctly?
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it, but I think, and I don't think it's as big I don't think that has been the constraint on your board necessarily. I think it's getting the homework done to prove that something's a good idea so that, it's embraced by us and by the community. I don't think it's going to make you all that much more nimble, but I think, so I'm not opposed, but I think it's, and you and I have had the discussion. I think, it's sort of having the right plan and having it set up so that everything's answered is going to be the key.
I agree. I agree with the sentiment of your statement, in that the board Affordable Housing Trust Fund needs to bring SB more thoughtfully put together plans to look for your approval. I think there have been some limitations in being able to get to the table to get into the nitty gritty of the details of a specific project when you look at what the numbers would be on road improvements, lot breakdown, subsidy amounts, credits, builder, to then have the SB vet them.
It's kind of a chicken and the egg.
Exactly.
Which comes first? Do you figure out how you're going to do it and then put your money down, or do you put the money down and then figure out how you're going to do it? It's so.
In my experience with development in general, things get tied up,
Yep.
and then you figure out how to put it together. In the free market space, that's how I often see things. So, looking for the ability to be able to tie things up to then bring the details to the board for approval.
So I get that this is a good discussion. I personally have a concern about the ability for you to sign a purchase and sale agreement because of the commitment that makes kind of down the line, without having come before the executive committee of the board. I don't have a problem with the deposit. I think you've got that authority now. But when you sign a purchase and sale agreement, once those contingencies are released, you have a, and I know the contingencies are select board and town of Nantucket, but you're further along down the process than you are just at the deposit phase, which I know you know. So
I don't disagree with you, Jim, and I don't know that this board doesn't have the ability to meet an executive session within the time window of a purchase and sale. So I don't see an instance that I'd be looking or encouraging to sign a purchase and sale before bringing it here.
that's why I think you've got the authority now to do it. So to do all this.
I think that's what's in question,
Yeah.
whether we do have the authority or not, and that's why I'm here.
So I think you do. So you can spend up to $100,000 without coming here. That could give you a deposit on a pretty nice piece of property. And I think you'd have time to come before us, and I think you'd want to before you sign a purchase and sale agreement.
Well,
That's the ideal. That's the ideal
Yeah,
situation.
I think we would want them to. So
Then I'd look for some clarification, Jim, because I'm not clear that whether or not I can negotiate property over $100,000. That's where my question is and why this has been written. So that's why
Well, you can
I'm here this
negotiate with those
request.
contingencies now, as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe we just need to make a motion to make that clear, that
I think
Or
it's
a
in the
consensus?
it's in the policies. We have that. It's not, so I don't think we need to take any action.
I don't think they felt it was clear that they could take that leap.
Do you want me to come back to the next meeting with the language and look for that clarification? Rather than a,
I think a clarification would be ideal, and I think there was a little bit of discussion even at the meeting today that I think this could be clarified and expanded a bit. And I think that this is an important discussion to have because, again, these are the kind of things that are an issue for the Affordable Housing Trust to be able to be nimble and agile. But I do think maybe taking these questions and providing the clarification and bringing it to another.
And just, you might want to ask town council, does the Affordable Housing Trust Fund have the authority to enter into negotiations with, a third party for the acquisition of property within its scope, given its current, policies that have been laid down by the select board?
So on the following agenda, do you think we should relook at the language and tweak it at all? If need to be, then we can make a motion at that
No,
time.
I think they've got the authority now, personally. So I don't think, but it's just from my,
Well, I think it would have been helpful even in our packet then to have, again, I think the letter on its own maybe wasn't enough information.
yeah.
Okay.
then I'd love the authority to speak to town council on it based on this board to make sure that I have to Jim's comment that
I think we all want you to be facile. And my only concern is, so I think you've got that authority now, but.
yeah, if you believe that it's there, then great. Then yeah, Fisher and I can head home and.
Do you think it can be clarified without coming back here in case there is an opportunity between now and our next meeting, which is not for a while?
2 weeks? I mean, I was told so.
Our next meeting's in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think.
they have the authority to issue a deposit now.
Well, that's what they're not sure about.
Can I get some clarification from
Again, yes.
our finance director?
That'd be great.
I saw Brian kind of shaking his head yes and no a couple times.
I think the issue is if they I do believe that they actually have the authority to negotiate now, which would still have to come forward to you. But if that negotiation resulted in a deposit that was in excess of $100,000,
Right.
I could not write the check to secure that. So I think that that's what they're looking for, is the potential to be able to, if they had a deposit that was in excess of the $100,000 limit, if you granted them to keep them as nimble as possible, then they're looking to have the authorization now to be able to write that deposit if necessary, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to.
I understand. That's why I said you don't write deposits for more than 100,000.
Well, I don't know
Right?
what the
Do
price
you?
of point of the real estate would be or what the deposit requirement would be. I'm not.
On it, let's say a $5 billion piece of property. What's the deposit for that?
It could be 1% to start, and then
Okay.
a remaining 9%
All right.
at the time the purchase
Okay.
and sale contract's done. That would
Okay.
be a legitimate offer.
So 50,000.
Yeah.
And the 5 million's a pretty. I would think
Right.
on the higher end of what you're thinking about. So I think you've got that. But
Okay.
All right, then
Yeah.
we'll leave it at that. All right,
Okay.
great. If the feeling is that, great.
Well, I feel like we should clarify if it is there, look at the actual language and make sure it is there. And if it's there, then it wouldn't need to be an agenda item again. If it's something that's still holding us back, then we might have to look at it again. But that's the clarification that I would like.
Okay.
I mean, I would make a motion that's subject to town council's approval that they do have the authority to make an offer on a piece of property.
And I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I guess my only question really is, there's the preliminary financials. It's the back of the envelope, maybe hopefully a little more than back of an envelope that's done before you decide, okay, we're gonna make an offer. Then there's then if it's accepted, then that's when you start doing the real work and really digging in, saying, okay, how are we gonna do this? How is it gonna work? And I think So as long, I'm comfortable with this, but I want, because we can always say no, but when it comes to us, I'd like to see the preliminary and why you're doing it, and, the preliminary financials and analysis, and then the more detailed, now that you've got it under analysis, so that so we understand. And, that's my biggest thing. And I like things, it should be in writing, and it should be like, for future reference. Too often, it's a lot of talk, and, oh, I think we did this, and we really kind of did that. These should be put aside, and we should learn from each one and have it in a file somewhere. I know you agreed, but I'm sort of,
I think that's worth having on the record, that statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other discussion on the motion? Ready for a vote? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'll abstain. I'd like to make another motion that I think there's been a good discussion. I would ask that the chair schedule a joint session between an executive session of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Select Board to have this very conversation. I think it's been very constructive and to get all the questions out that all of us have had.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
While I have the microphone, just one statement, question, comment that I didn't make at the last meeting. And I wanted to thank the board for the funding approval that happened last time, but where I was remiss was not getting up to the microphone and thanking the non-voting taxpayer who donated the structure and the cash funds to help Housing Nantucket move the building, which will now become a SHI qualified unit. So I want to point out that was a very thoughtful participation by somebody in our community who stepped up both personally and financially, and I'd like to commend that individual. I don't know that they're prepared to be announced by name, but it was very, very thoughtful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
I think Josh might have a concern with the executive session.
Can you come, Josh, you got to come to yeah, that's all right.
Josh Balling, Inquirer and Mayor. Why would that discussion have to take place in executive session if it was not targeting a particular piece of property? That sounds like a general discussion that should be held in open session.
Right, there's no litigation, no real estate, right? So we can have an open session if it doesn't need to be.
If there's not a specific property that
If
we're
there's
going
a
to discuss.
specific property, it goes into executive.
If we're looking at the rules, whether we want to raise 100 to 150 or whatever, we can do that in open session.
Yes.
I don't know if you care, but I just pulled up Article 72 of the 2009 annual town meeting, which is where it was voted on. And I don't know if there's been any changes since that vote, but I can put the language up there that talks about the 100,000 if you are interested in seeing it at this point.
Sure.
I'm fine with that.
Right here, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think under the acts of the trustees, any expenditure by the trust to any one party in a cumulative amount exceeding $100,000 shall be approved by the select board.
Prior
But
to
that's the
finalizing.
actual expenditure, not the negotiation, it
right.
seems like.
Yeah, so they have that authority now to negotiate, just as Brian said.
Great. Thank you.
Good.
And Brian, if you do feel you need to get access to town council and clarify anything, reach out to town administration.
Great.
You mentioned that.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Fisher, for sitting through this. Mr. Gullickson, are you here for Harbor Fuel? We've already voted on that. Just not to waste your time.
And it was favorable.
It is favorable, 4-1. Okay, moving on to public hearings. I'd like to open the public hearing to consider application for a mobile food unit for Lola Burger, a food truck license, DBA Lola Burger.
Good evening. This application, as you said, for a mobile food unit, Lola Burger. The folks that run Lola Burger are getting a mobile food unit. It's operating in Boston and here as well in Nantucket. We've gone through the fingerprinting process. They're working with health right now to make sure all those requirements are met. Currently, and Brian can speak to this, the plans are just for private events only as a catering type of tool. As I said in the recommendation, should the future bring them to locations such as beach parking lots owned by Land Bank, the town, or anything of that sort, they would have to come back as far as getting that added to their license. They would need property owner approval, which they know. So currently, the license would just read for private events only. And Brian's here to speak.
Good evening, Brian Swain, attorney for the applicant. As Amy said, this is just a food truck application to be used for private catered events. I advised my client that he can't take it to any parking lots or on any public property. He has no intention to do so. It's just an extension of Lola Burger where he could drive up to someone's house and cater a private event. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Would you be able to have it when the restaurant was closed? Could you open it up in your parking lot and have a private event?
They can bring fries to my house. No, they couldn't. We have regulations as far as within operating restaurants and their parking lot. That's kind of been a question. I know Island Kitchen sometimes works out of theirs too in their parking lot. So it's their property. Yeah, I mean that.
I'm okay either way. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
think of what are we not looking at?
Correct. I mean, certainly, if they were going to do that, we would probably have to have that discussion. We have certain requirements as far as 500 feet from any other licensed facility, but that's mostly going to be in the historic district in downtown. Obviously, you don't want to just park it near all the restaurants. So, but in their own parking lot. Yeah.
But we also specify seating, outside seating, amplified.
Correct.
I mean,
Parking and.
So I think we.
Like I said, anything other than just catering a private event, like they would probably, and they're very good at this, contacting us and having that discussion. But, again, it's private property, so.
There's no intention to do
correct.
that at the moment, but that's a good question.
Yeah, we've gone through that question with a couple of them. So but again, it's certainly case by case basis. We'd have to discuss it. But you're right, they would have parking regulations and
So
that
the
sort.
answer
It's
for
already
now. So
definitely
the answer
not
is
in
no
August.
for now.
It's something, anything other than a private catered event, they would have to come back and put that on. It wouldn't be on their license currently. Correct.
Where's the truck going to be kept?
It's going to be kept at Lola Burger.
What about the Lola Burger parking requirements? You guys have a valet service already.
Yeah.
Is there room to take up 2 or 3 spaces with the truck?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean,
We'll have
that's
to-
a planning board issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the special permit and see what's required.
So what if it's not able to be parked there? Where is it going to be parked?
We haven't explored that possibility.
Okay.
So probably need an answer to that, Amy, before I
Yeah,
can
this is going to
comfortable
be
acting on it.
correct. This is contingent on final inspections and that sort of thing. So they just wanted to go through this while they were getting it through health.
Could we continue this till the next meeting so I can find out the information that you're requesting?
That's fine. Yeah, we
we
thought
do
they
that?
would need to do this quickly.
Or could we approve
It's
it
fine.
contingent on?
Yeah,
I don't know if we're comfortable doing that, but is that another option?
it's an option. Generally, these are going to be approved on contingencies because they need to go through final inspections. For most of these, I prefer they go ahead of time to make sure that the idea of the license is fine before they spend money and go through all of this process and get denied. So it certainly can be approved with contingencies and final approval from the board and the departments that have to inspect it.
But I think the answer to that,
Correct.
it's a good question. And I
Yes.
think that we would expect the applicant to have an answer to that
No,
when they
absolutely.
come before us.
I agree.
So, and they don't, so
Yep.
I'd prefer to.
For clarity purposes, could you just reiterate what the board wants me to find out for the next hearing?
It's going to be, as far as I know, they're keeping this in Boston and bringing it here too for specific events, but if it's going to be kept in the Lola Burger parking lot, or if it's going to be kept in another location, my assumption was not in the summer months, but you're going to have a certain number of parking spaces based on zoning, especially because of the tight parking spaces you already have. Is it going to take up how many spaces? And is that going to be in violation of the number of spaces you need to provide
Special permit.
per the permit?
Okay.
The question, even if we did approve it here, if it passed, wouldn't it still not get approved at the end if this doesn't work?
Correct.
For parking and violations there?
So most of these, when we do, I mean, for most things, I think we do approve based on contingencies, based on them going through final inspections and that sort of thing. So when you approve it, you're approving the process for the license we haven't issued. We're not going to issue it after this. They still have to go finalize these inspections, so we can certainly add that.
But
It's up to
typically,
you
they're
if you
for things
prefer that.
within the purview of town administration.
Correct.
They're not things related to the planning board. So
Correct.
this is, I don't remember a planning, a contingency that we gave that was contingent on a planning board responsibility, so.
Basically, when they're going to have to get signed off at the end of this is going to be health, fire, does inspections for these types of things, and
yeah.
zoning. We've had mobile units in parking lots, like 167 Raw has a similar situation, and zoning did go through that as far as how much sheeting they need to provide. They're not going to serve out of it currently, so it's just going to be checking and making sure, and that's something we will add to our checklist at the end, that they are not taking away any parking spaces that they're required to have. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because they're not going to be serving out of it at this time, so zoning wouldn't be involved in that part, but as far as parking it there and taking spaces, certainly. That would be part of the final inspections that we would have to do.
And you want to wait
and
for a final
sign-offs.
answer, Jim? Or do you think it's
I think it'd be-
not part of our?
No, I think it'd be helpful to know that. I think that
Yeah.
it's a question that.
No, it's a good question. I
Yeah.
agree, and I apologize. I
Yeah.
didn't have that answer.
I'm comfortable with continuing it,
Are you gonna open it up for public?
but there's might be public comments.
Right. Is there anybody here from the public like to speak on this issue? Okay.
I'm Erica Mooney. I'm a direct abutter to Lola Burger. And I would urge you to continue the public hearing until the issue of the parking is figured out. Currently, they do have to engage the services of the valet service. And I know that they are using adjacent property not owned by them at 3 Sparks Ave, which in full disclosure is owned by my family, for parking. So I would hate to see further spaces taken away when it's already maxed out. But
Okay.
please continue.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Thank you. Just a couple questions and why Brian's going back to get some more updates on the truck. It will be for their dumping, for the waste dumping at the plant. We do issue a license at the treatment plant for mobile food units. The biggest concern will be is we just need to see how the layout of the truck is, how the waste, where the waste discharge is, to make sure that we can get them in the building, back them in or pull them in. All the other trucks usually come out and do a trial run, just if we can get a layout of the truck, just to make sure they can dump. I don't anticipate they're planning on dumping on their own property through a clean out, but just so that they can come out to the plant and give us an idea.
Yeah. Okay. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Oh, we want to continue it.
No, we're gonna continue.
I'm sorry?
Continue.
Continue it
Oh,
to.
we're continuing the public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
But before we do, I have a question of Amy, if I could. How many food trucks do we now have?
Probably 6 to 8 at most. A few dropped off.
And
Yeah,
what's
we have-
been your experience from a licensing or complaints or whatever
No,
perspective?
I mean, people love food trucks, but we limited spaces obviously for them. There's a
But it's been a
couple-
good experience from
Yeah,
your, okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
thank
As
you.
long as they just stay in the certain areas we have,
Yeah.
we don't have roaming. We have availability for
Right.
roaming licenses should it be ice cream only, but
Okay.
a lot are at Cisco and some of the beach parking lots. So, yeah, so far so good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion to continue the public hearing?
Motion to continue
Motion
to,
a date
is it
certain
September
of
12th?
September 12th.
Your public hearing date is usually the 17th.
But this September we're doing the 12th. Remember for the other two.
Yeah, September.
So make a motion that we continue the public hearing to September 12th.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Yep.
Okay. Next up, we have a public hearing. We'll open the public hearing to consider application for change of license class from annual wine and malt beverage restaurants to seasonal wine and malt beverage for Lola Burger.
Lola Burger back in. So this is just, again, a process. As you remember, this winter, they changed to an annual license so that they could serve while Lola 41 was down for repairs during the sewer incident of this winter. So this is just a process so that they can go back, and they will be closing after, I think, in September, October, in the fall. So just a process, and thank you to them for obviously opening their restaurants in that time and keeping folks employed and fed for the winter. So no objections, obviously.
Brian Swain, attorney for Lolaberger. This is just a simple classification change to their existing liquor license. It's going from annual to seasonal. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
This is a public hearing. Any comments from the public? Ms. Mooney.
Sorry. I just wanted to say Lola Burger has been a great neighbor. And we were in favor of when they changed to an annual license, and we are in favor of changing back to a seasonal, but they've been, even though I was concerned about the parking, they're really good neighbors, so.
Thank you.
Great. Any other comments from the public? Okay, I think we'll close the public hearing. It's a pleasure of the board.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't know if we need to ever consider this maybe down the road, a policy on how many food trucks we have. I don't know if we need to have limitations, but maybe it's something.
Why I asked the question?
You want a
yeah.
policy?
I figure
Yeah.
that's why.
It seems like it's going pretty well, though, so.
Okay, town managers report. We have the FY 2018 end of year budget reports.
Yes, we have a couple of enterprise fund year and annual reports. I'd like to ask Mark Willett from Wanna Comment to come down. Thank you, Mark.
Good evening. Mark Willett, Want to Comment. As you can see from the numbers, we finished the year and the quarter on a good note. Even though water production, water sales was down, as it has extended from the sewer main break when we asked for conservation. People are still following that. We're still seeing that now. So it's not a bad thing that we're not selling as much water. We did make some up on the service connection fee. We were about $33,000 more than what we budgeted on connection fees. For us, that's a very difficult number to pin down. You're asking us to project out a year or a year and a half from now how many new homes we're going to connect. We missed it by 6 in 2018, so we got pretty close. Other than that, we had about 1.25 in surplus that will go into our retained earnings, which is getting close to $3 million. The commission is currently trying to determine with us what a safe number in that fund is for emergency purposes or anything that happens. And the remainder of that would be going to capital once we determine after our rate study what that safe number is. So in the future, once we have the numbers, the surplus will be going towards capital projects, so we can borrow less money and use what we have. And going forward, we're going to have some potential for more revenue. In the middle of the fourth quarter of this 2018, we were approached by all the cell phone carriers, major carriers, all want space on the tanks, small antennas on top. Well, we're in the process of getting proposals back on that right now, so that'll be another revenue stream for Wanacoma. But other than that, we finished, on a good note.
Could you put a water tank with cell phones in Tom Nevers?
There's been a lot of talk about running water out to Tom Nevers. People, I think the water's good out there, though. I don't
It's
know.
great.
He wants the cell phone
He wants the
service.
cell phone.
The cell service
He wants
is
a
not so
tank.
good.
When we talk about Sconset, you'll be happy because those same carriers, if we move on to Sconset, unless there's any other questions on Wanacoma.
No?
Sconset, as you can see, we budgeted a little over $1 million. We did not meet that budget. We were about $50,000 short. Brian in the finance department put us onto that pretty early in the year of a trend. We kind of controlled our spending. We did not spend more than the revenue brought in. We still ended up with a $207,000 surplus. But we are seeing a trend island-wide, which is good because we kind of been promoting both in Sconset and in town water conservation, irrigation. These rainy days. This morning, I went to check the water tower, and we were about 10 feet higher than we usually are on a Wednesday morning. Well, for every foot is about 50,000 gallons. So just today, because of the rain, the rainy morning, and the irrigation not going off, we didn't sell 250, 300,000 gallons of water that we would have sold on a sunny morning. So I think it's a good thing. that those numbers are dropping. Even though we're adding more services, we're pumping less water. So financially, there is an impact, but we can find ways to get around that. And Sconset has been approached by the same cell phone carriers, the big three, and they're looking for space out there that would help the Tom Nevers area.
That'd be great. What's the timing for that?
What's that?
What would be the timing for?
We would probably get, they're hoping to have their proposals done within the next month or two, and then we would review, have their engineers, whoever they are, whoever we think has the best proposal, have their engineers come down. We'll go up on the tank with them, go over the specifications on how to attach things to the tank to save the coating, and then move on from there. But once they get the go-ahead, and there's already one carrier on the Sconset Water Tower now, a couple of weeks for those guys to put their gear up.
And so who's on there now?
Sprint is on there now.
Okay. And with the other ones, AT&T, are the other ones all interested?
AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, they all want it. We've set a policy where we not allow more than 2 carriers on each tank. Just because we have our own stuff up there, we also have police and fire have stuff up there as well. We've been talking with David a little bit about getting a repeater for his wastewater plant and SCADA system up on the tower. So we want to save space for our needs as well. But there is room.
Is this a financial decision, or do you consider the
No, we're just going
amount
to
of
look
service?
at the proposal. Financially, Wanacom, it's okay. We're not looking for additional revenue. See what the numbers come in at. If it's something that we don't think is going to jeopardize the coating or the function of the water tower, it's something we would look at, and the commission will discuss. It's not. They came to us. We didn't.
No.
we didn't
My
come.
point is, it's up to the commission, but it might be nice for them to consider the market penetration of the cell phone companies.
Yep.
So if there's one that looks great on paper, but they have very few users, and another one has a bunch, and that might, from a service perspective.
We actually have
people in
that
Nantucket.
on. We have certain items that we're going to look at, and that is part of it.
Okay.
We want to kind of spread the wealth. We don't want one to be on all. It would be nice if we could kind of get everybody up and running, but if we even decide to do it, we'll have to look at the proposal, look at what type of equipment they want to put up, look at what type of power supplies they're going to need, and work all that out.
Yeah, I was just wondering what sort of things you're able to do to curb the expenses. I think that's great that you're able to respond.
We ended up doing a lot of stuff ourselves, which was a good thing. We learned how to do a lot of electrical work with the motor controls. We cut back on some of the professional service engineering services that we were going to start doing in Sconset. We did them ourselves.
Okay.
So those might actually continue now that we've kind of self-taught.
Great. Yeah, excellent.
Quick question, when's the last time we had to ration or the water got so low in the
It was probably 8 or 9 years ago where we actually put a irrigation ban on. You could only water on certain days, and there was a penalty, a financial penalty, if you watered when you weren't supposed to. The problem with that is, in a lot of cases, if someone has that beautiful new home and their landscape was $200,000 or $300,000 to put in, they were coming in with blank checks saying, "We're going to pay the fees. I just installed, a $250,000 landscape. I can't let it die." So it's hard to enforce. It's only happened once in the 19, 20 years I've been at Wanacom. The groundwater level's still up, the conservation and the less pumping. This year we're going to have far fewer days over 4 million gallons than we had last year, even though we put in 116 new services in 2018. So, and we all know what's coming forward with some of the bigger subdivisions and the more connections. So that guess on, connection fees is it's gonna be a best guess in the next couple of years, because even though we have plans coming in and there's certain construction schedules set out, sometimes those schedules aren't met and things get pushed off or things get speed up. So, but we've only had to do the water restriction one time.
Thank you.
So where are we at with our permit capacity?
Permit capacity is still being looked at. We've got some numbers, some projected numbers for 2021. Right now, they're hoping that we stick within 3 to 4% of our old number. Last year, we pumped 102% of our old number. So looking at what they're looking at giving us a 15% increase for 2021. But when you project out what's happening on Old South Road and other potential things happening in a lot of the tertiary and a lot of the buildings going on, by 2021, we will already be over the 2021 permit issued number. So they've set up they're in the process of setting up a mitigation for us for every piece of land in our zone 2 that is either owned by land bank or conservation. They will give us so many gallons per minute for every square foot of land that's occupied as safe space, conservation space. So they'll give us the 15%, and then we might be able to get, I'm hoping, another 10% from conservation land. And that might be enough to squeak by, but it's going to take some negotiations. It's not a closed door. I mean, we can definitely, they're open to negotiating on that permit. We can probably show the demand is there. Currently, it's not just a permit number, it's mechanically getting the water out. So we've started talks with the land bank about maybe a potential land swap for another well site. Wannacomet has some land, town on some land on Washing Pond around our water tower. And they have some land that would work for us well off of Milestone Road. So the only way to really increase that number without dealing with a 20-year permit is to create a new source, create a new well, a pumping well.
But is that still coming from the same source? Or isn't it a single?
Each well they call a different source. So even though it's the same aquifer, I know it's crazy thinking, Matt, when you try to explain to them, it's all the straws are in the same bowl.
That's what I'm,
That's right. I could have a well literally one here and one, at the intersection of Fairgrounds Road, and they're calling it two different sources. So they'll give you a separate pumping permit for each source, even though we're a sole source aquifer and all the straws are in the same bowl at the same depth.
So they're not basing it on the capacity of the aquifer, are they?
They're basing it off of population number, which I don't know where they get this. I know it comes from DCR. I don't know who did the math. They're saying our summer population is 27,900, somewhere around there. So and we know, I don't know, but I think it's more than that.
Can we show them the Nantucket data platform data?
I've tried to give them information. They go off of their numbers. This is where negotiation takes place, and we could maybe, when I go back up to Lakeville to DEP to talk about the permit, I could bring different sets of numbers with me to show them that 27,000 is probably closer to our, I'm not saying the winter population is that, but that's probably closer to our winter population than our summer.
It is.
So if we can prove that case based off population, we could probably get an increase without the mitigation, with the land mitigation. But it's going to be those are important numbers to start looking at, because we're at the point where, 5 or 6 years, if we're already exceeding our permit numbers before we even get to that year, we're going to have to come up with something.
So
But it almost seems. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so the only other way is to put limitations on irrigation, probably.
Put limitations on irrigation and find a new source. And we understand the financial impact to the landscape community and the homeowners with limitations on irrigation. And it could be not stopping irrigation completely, but maybe 2 days a week, 3 days a week.
I will go on the record and say most properties are over irrigated, and I think
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, we
probably.
have the irrigation meters, the deduct meters that count outside water use, and some of the numbers are staggering. What's going on?
Yeah,
with irrigation.
unnecessarily. So I think that would be a very easy.
I think if
fix.
it's a healthy landscape and it's being taken care of, irrigating 2 or 3 times a week would probably keep it going.
I think we all remember a lot more brown lawns when we were younger.
Yes. There was a time we did not have irrigation.
Yeah.
I like to think there's an in-between, though, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting, though, if it's a population number, then they're not really looking at the actual capacity of the aquifer.
No, we have spent.
Who is looking at that? Are you guys looking?
We're looking at that. So
Okay.
we've spent several $1 million over the last 7 or 8 years doing our geophysics and building this model, and we've given them all that data to show them the billions and billions of gallons that we have and the billions of gallons of recharge.
Right.
So they look at more of a per capita gallon use. Every person uses whatever number they come up with. I think ours is in that 80 range, 80 gallons per person. So they take that and they throw in their population number, and then they come up with their, right now we can pump 1.6 million a day. The reason that works is in the wintertime we don't come near that. In the summertime we're pumping 4 million a day. But they take your average at the end. If they move us to 1.9 million a day,
So if you prove the population,
if we prove the population, that number would drastically change. That number would move way up.
And what do they require to prove population?
They're getting me that information. When I found that number out 2 weeks ago, I in emails and phone calls told them that is not a true number. I don't know how DCR gets those numbers. I don't know how the state projects growth, but that's not our number.
Well,
I don't know what that number is. I don't know if it's 50, is it 60? I don't know what the real summer population is, but I know it's a lot more than 27,000.
Yeah, peak, according to the data project, is just under 50 on the peak weekends. It's like 48,
So it could
49.
be safe for me to get in touch with them and say we're pushing 50 in the summer.
Yeah, 50 would be safe because I don't think they haven't collected figures on boats and some other things yet. They've got a little bit to finalize. And the way they've done it is very interesting. It's not just a survey or people's things, it's their phones.
Yeah,
and where does the phone sleep at night?
Yeah.
And where does the phone go during the day?
And that's
amazing.
double, that's almost double what they're thinking. So, and then the other thing is with these projects that are going on Old South and South Shore, those aren't summertime numbers. So my winter daily average is going to increase.
Right.
So there won't be as much play when I get to the summer to have a bigger pumping day. So there's
I
a
think
whole
there's a
lot
lot of data out there to support a higher number, and this is an important community issue, and I'm sure there's folks within the town outside of the water company that can help you.
And I'll be seeking that help. We just found out that number last week.
Is there something to be said for maybe not trying to get the capacity too high so we can continue the conservation?
Yes.
I mean, that's one solution. I mean, I don't want all of this to be rationed year round. But
No, there's still, even though they give us a bigger pumping permit, that doesn't mean that we have to follow those. We just can't pump over it. We could restrict it in any way we wanted to stay under it. They don't like it when you pump over it. They don't care what you do as long as you're under that 1.6 a day. They're happy, and they don't care if we restrict it in any way or if we limit irrigation. We're free to do that at any point in time that we want to.
Thank you.
Sorry, that went way beyond the financial report, but that was really good information.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. All right, different kind of water. David? Oh.
Just make a quick public comment on that. So as someone who lives in the hinterlands of Tom Nevers, I would say that getting better cell service would be a tremendous public service, and I would advocate very strongly for the board to seek that not as a monetary offset, but as a community service.
I don't know if you heard that we had that discussion at the beginning of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Good evening again, everybody. Well, it's hard to believe it's been a year already, and it was a bit of a tough year, I will say. And that does show in some of our numbers. And I can say a lot to what Mark was saying, as we're seeing some significant decreases as well as flows coming in. Normally this time of year, we're between 2.2 or 2.4, 2.5 million gallons, and we've barely broken 2 million gallons, but 2 or 3 times this whole summer. It's been dry, which is a benefit for us because we're not getting the II, but the conservation worked. And it really worked this winter, and it's still working quite significantly, and that shows in our numbers. because of our revenues and our income fees were down because of that, the less usage of the water, which has been okay. We're under a construction project at the plant, so I've been happy to see less flows this year than what we normally would see. But all in all, the numbers are pretty good. We did have a lot of unanticipated overtime with the force main break, and a lot of unanticipated specialized equipment repairs and rentals. Nantucket, up until about a month after the force main, but we did not have a bypass pump on the island. We had no way to bypass any pump stations or any kind of incident that happened. So we have been renting one since about a month after the force main. It's still at the plant. It's still ready to go at a moment's notice, but that was something that we never had before. And I don't want to have to relive that again without the means to be able to pump. All new pump stations getting built now are going to have bypass ability built right into them. So we're going to be able to drag a pump up, hook it up to the pump station, and put everything back online instantaneously. So a lot of future thought has gone into where we are. We have some more staff on. We still have not filled our, we have 3 openings currently. We haven't filled them as of yet. Trying to find candidates has been tough. We also still have an engineering position that is open, which should also help offset our professional services costs, like Mark is. We'll have an in-house engineer on staff that will be able to do a lot of our professional service stuff, that so we won't have to have the increases in that going forward.
Dave, can I ask you, is it no one's applying, or you're getting close to someone and they can't find housing?
A lot of it's been, there hasn't been really anyone up. I mean, if you wait, as soon as you mention the word sewer or wastewater, people are like, oh boy. So as soon as we have a posting, like, I invite everyone out for an interview, even before a tour before their interview. And it usually changes their perception on what they're seeing. We have now had 3, and actually they're all local people apply. We've interviewed, and we're just working through the process now. We have one gentleman starting on Monday, so it took some time. I mean, we had the ad out for, I think we posted it 3 times. And
Perception.
yeah, it's exactly that. And it's once they come out, they have a whole different outlook on what it is. But I don't know if you had any other questions. It's just been, with everyone's support, it was a rough year. So, but we did. I think we still came out okay. We're just about our projected balance on our retained earnings is just a little over $3 million. So we're still doing okay.
Any questions, comments?
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
You did an amazing job this year.
Yeah, it was a tough one, but it was support from everyone like you guys. I mean, it was good. And one brief thing is, we have our new CCTV camera truck that you guys will start seeing out on the road, that we were able to get through the Schimel project. So we'll be able to answer our own questions. We won't have to, again, professional services, we're going to be able to cut that way back, because we'll have our own certified crews that can camera the main lines. So we're looking, just like Mark, to do a lot of it ourselves.
That's great.
Great. And our final enterprise fund, solid waste.
Good evening, Rob McNeil, DPW. By the numbers, we're basically looking at 3% revenue, down 3%, I should say, from 18. We have C&D was down slightly, and MSW was up slightly. Overall, it was 6% above the budgeted revenue, but again, numbers are down a little bit from last year. I'm not sure if we're seeing the peak or just over the peak of the boom here, or if it's something else. A couple notables moving forward here. We have recycling coordinator is starting this coming Monday, so I'm excited about that.
Congrats.
Had a great opportunity to speak to the Civic League, presented the landfill and all the aspects to it about a couple weeks ago now. And the Solid Waste Advisory Group is churning through lots of interesting initiatives, both on the ACO front and some of the issues that need to be addressed in the next coming months, but looking forward to next contract issues and what's to come of the landfill and the rest of the site.
I'd just ask if, once your recycling coordinator is on board and you maybe bring them, introduce them to the board, but also at some point kind of talk about kind of the vision or the priorities, and just so we can kind of create awareness on the part of the community that we've got this resource
Sure.
available. And thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add, I like the new signs at the dump. And I've been hearing rave reviews about the change in driving pattern, which I was nervous about you being able to pull off so well. But there's been a lot of good feedback.
Oh, that's good. I would echo that and say that we've been receiving lots of feedback as well, all positive,
Great.
which is good stuff.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Next, Mr. Chair, we have our liquor license compliance check report. I think this is our round 2. I'll ask our business licensing agent to come back down.
Hello. I believe this is request. Give me if I'm not sure exactly kind of what we're requesting. We're requesting a hearing date. I
Hearing
believe.
date.
Correct. Okay, so per the Town of Nantucket rules and regulations governing alcoholic beverages, once we do these compliance checks, which are in line with ABCC regulations, that we do every year, that we are to notify the board within 14 days, which we did in both cases of both these rounds. And now we're requesting to set a hearing date of Wednesday, September 12th to address the violations listed above. As we've done in years past, what we will do is provide the background, the police report regarding the specific compliance check, the history of the specific license, and the recommendation from the police department and licensing as far as a warning or any sanctions for these establishments. Any questions? What we've submitted so far?
I just have one. I know it's up to us to make the determination, but it's helpful
Correct.
to have, especially when we're end up in some litigation, and if we have a little more specificity in terms of
Correct, the
maybe
guidelines.
maybe call them a guideline rather than a
Right.
recommendation. I'm not sure what the verbiage, but just so because if there is a conflict, what we've done in the past has always been noted by the
Correct.
appellant. So
Correct, and we've had the experience of going to Boston for these situations. So a couple things I've done, I certainly will give you the history, the background, and based on our guidelines for first offense, warning, second offense, one, that sort of thing. I also have examples from ABCC decisions on very similar, on their compliance checks to give you kind of background on
Great.
how they handle it and the things that they consider as well, so that we'll be doing something in line with the state.
Okay, cool.
So I found a whole bunch of
Nice.
decisions. So,
cool.
okay, I will include that in the packet for you to read
Great.
as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah.
We need to be careful. with
Yes.
Whatever decision we're going to make.
And based on our experience, we would like to have that as well. So,
But I noticed that there weren't that unnamed
yeah. Yeah.
provider did not appear on the list this year.
Yes.
So I think that's
it's
a good thing.
Correct. Like last year, we had a very quiet year, and then this year, this is a similar type of numbers. But I think mostly it's going to be warnings or possibly one day situations. And it was a tough, busy year. There's no blatant violations, but it happens. So
Do you need a motion to set this?
Please.
Someone make a motion?
Motion to schedule for September 12th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Greg.
Town manager's report. On to the select board's reports and comments. Discussion regarding establishing adult use retail marijuana licensing criteria. We put this on the agenda to get the conversation started. We're not going to, I don't think we need to decide anything. On September 12th, town council, Katie, is going to be here to maybe we have a final, a first draft. We decide on some things. I know in the packet there's only one example, and I think we're going to have more of those. But I wanted to give us just a quick second to discuss this in open session on what are we looking for, what are some must-haves that we want. Do we want it to be an RFQ? And I know we need more information on that. And also, I'd like to get the board's thoughts on timing. Do we want to have whatever we decide the criteria RFQ after the special town meeting? We can still work on it, but do we want to make any decisions? Do we want to say we like everything submitted on November 15th, or just kind of start thinking through that?
I think it would be ideal to have it before the town meeting, just based on the deadlines and having the opportunity to, if there's this is only applicable, just to clarify, this is only applicable if is a limitation, correct?
No, I think we would need it either way.
Interesting.
I think sorry
Go ahead.
to jump in. I think that we want clear criteria for anyone that we license in case, there might be someone who doesn't meet the criteria that we don't want to grant a license to and want to have reasoning behind it.
Is the difference just there'd be a set of criteria versus an actual RFQ? The RFQ would only happen if there was a limitation.
Yes,
Because
I
we
think
wouldn't.
so.
Oh,
Right?
well, that's what I.
If it was
an
for
RFQ
the
would
one
be,
remaining,
yeah.
if it gets limited to 2.
I think they're equally as important in different ways. Right? So if the limitation doesn't pass, and then 20 people apply, we would really need to have it really structured and have an RFQ or whatever we decide criteria. Who are we going to decide to give the license out to or not? Right? And then if there's only 2 licenses,
Yeah, that's what seems to me an RFQ would be necessary if there was a limitation. Whereas if there's no limitation, then, like for example, you put out an RFQ for a project, so it's a defined project versus the criteria. In my thinking, would apply if there's 20 applications. All the applications, you only get it if you meet the criteria, but it's not an actual RFQ. An RFQ would have a time frame on it as well, whereas criteria would be whenever someone comes to us.
Yeah, I think we need to develop criteria across the board, but an RFQ would be more specific. It would have certain deadlines and it would have certain criteria that would be gauged as like,
if there was a limitation.
so, someone met it this much better than this person did in terms of the different things you're looking for.
But we may decide to only do this once a year or once every 2 years. I mean, we may want to have an art. To me, I don't see that the RFQs necessarily linked to a limitation of a license. I could see it under with limitations or without limitations, because we may want to bundle them. I mean, I don't know, but we may want to bundle the considerations. For example, that would want us to consider an RFQ.
I think an RFQ, in my mind, it's soliciting responses. So it would, if we don't have a limitation, it would be strange every year to solicit people to come and give us proposals for businesses, and if they're not there. If they're there, they come and there's criteria. But I think that can be answered probably by town council. That was just how I was imagining it in my head.
Matt,
Yeah, I'm not sure that, I know, I won't speak for you guys, but I'll speak for myself. I'm not qualified to write criteria for this.
Right.
I have no idea what the criteria should be on this, on marijuana establishments and which ones and why. I have my own biases or personal opinions about different things, but I just think it's and it's even funny, the example we have is really just asking, they're basically asking the businesses a lot of questions that are all the questions that you read when you read the, what's required when you apply. But there's no criteria, like how are you, like I don't know how they're scoring this or something. So I think there's a lot to this. I think this is fairly complex.
And I agree, and I passed that along to the chair. I think I would like to see, we have town council that is advising towns throughout the Commonwealth. I'd like to see what their experience are, some specific recommendations, some constellations of other towns, and because right now I'm not. I agree with Matt. I'm not qualified to even talk about RFQs versus criteria. So,
well, I think we have to talk about it a little bit. Because we have to give direction to town administration and Katie for what we want to have by September 12th. And I found out she was on vacation the last 2 weeks. That's why we didn't have a lot of stuff from Katie. She just came back from vacation.
I mean, I'd be looking for broad things like financial stability, safety, connections to Nantucket, which locations might be the better locations in terms of safety. I mean, yeah, it's, I don't intend to be the one to write it, but I think we could give some kind of broad direction.
We can give direction, we can get an example from other towns, something from town council, and then we can see if we are comfortable with whether it's RFQ or criteria. I just want us to have a conversation on what makes sense and what direction do we want to go. So we're not doing this on September 12th with Katie, with town council here.
And I've emailed them.
What's that? Okay. Because there's ways you could have 6 sections and 5 people apply, highly advantageous, not, unqualified, different sections. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But I do believe it comes down to us, correct? Right? So we might not be qualified to set up the criteria in RFQ, but we still have to.
Well, it comes down to us directing staff or to make
Right.
sure that it's been researched properly and that we're not just picking the first city that is handed to us, and that it's written properly and implemented properly. I mean, that there's, and we have criteria, and we've done this on some of our bids and things, but then sometimes, that isn't always perfect. Sometimes we haven't done the financials on it, or the financial bid done wrong, and we're still voting away. So I just think we have to be careful not to put ourselves in that situation. There was an article in the Globe today, and we're talking about labs and testing and how, we're saying it would be great. We really need a lab for the online growers, but there's a huge issue because there's 2 ways to test the product, and they come out differently. And so these guys are going to whichever one is more advantageous at the time, and they're not testing for tons of different chemicals and tons of different pesticides. They're only testing for certain things. And so there's stuff the state has pushed this thing, but they don't even understand. The labs are there's 2 different lab tests now that come out completely differently. So I think there's a lot to this.
So
I have no idea.
So we've discussed here that the Board of Health is taking action on that. We had a little presentation on how that's even further complicated because we're not going to have a lab on island, so we're less able to test for all those things. So I can just let you know that the Board of Health is taking that very seriously.
For timing, would we want to get this, have a final draft ready by special town meeting, so we're prepared going forward?
To me, I think it's unrealistic to have set a date until we know what the range of options are. So again, without any due diligence from staff, from town council, I'm not ready to give us a deadline at this time until we get some more information.
I'd be comfortable with just continuing to talk about this and get recommendations until after town meeting when we know whether we really want to do an RFQ or not. Like start to frame the kind of criteria we would want just in review and for a goal of if there is a limitation and we're going to issue an RFQ for the second license, then we would do it after town meeting.
And I sort of didn't think that thoroughly that special town meeting is so close. But ideally, I would love to have it
3 more
ready so that
meetings.
so that we have enough time before the January 1st deadline, so that we'd have enough time to review everything. Before town meeting might be unrealistic, but I thought the town of Tingsboro was very extensive questioning and a great example of a direction to go in. And then understanding how they then weighted each of the responses would also be interesting. But I do think something as extensive as this would be a minimum of what we would have.
I agree with that. I know Erica's getting some of this down to reach out to Katie to give her some direction for the 12th. I just want to get a sense of the board on timing. How much work do we need to have done by special town meeting, if any? Does it make, what you're saying, Jim, does it make sense to wait until it's a limitation or not? And we're going to know where to go forward at that point.
Again, in the absence of some kind of environmental assessment or knowledge what other folks are doing, I don't have any can't offer some guidelines on timing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't mind, timing it after town meeting when we understand what the parameters will be, but I think, yeah.
I suppose in the name of having it be more detailed, productive work, waiting until after town meeting. So then we can have that clarification of exactly what it will be. RFQ criteria, maybe they're both.
Okay. So I think for September 12th, we'll have a lot more in front of us in the packet to discuss and look at, and then we can make some decisions there.
One thing I did notice as well is that this was how they handle the financial audits is a bit different than what we currently have requested from Green Lady. So I think things like that are definitely points to make note of what we've already approved.
Any other comments or questions from the board? All right, someone from the public wants to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen Cohen. I just have a question since we're sort of going through this process. It's a little unclear to me if there's actually a license involved here or if it's the host community agreement acts as your license. And if that's the case, when you talk about having two, is there going to be is Green Lady still have to get a license, or does their HCA mean they already have one? So is there one available, or are there going to be two available if there's a two limit? And then also, are you talking about having an annual renewal of that, where like you have liquor licenses and common vic licenses and those kind of things? It's the whole process is a little unknown, and I think it'd be helpful to get a lot more of that information, not just the information that you want to collect from applicants, but also it'd be great to have greater information out there for the applicants to know what information does the board want, how is the board going to value that information, and what is the process going to look like.
I think that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
What to tell applicants what we need to know from you.
Yeah, but not just what information do you want to collect, but what information what do you value, and how do you value it, and what's that process going to look like? Is there a license, or is it just the host community agreement? And I don't know that
Those are all good questions, and I think they'll be evaluated and answered over time.
Great, thank you.
So,
Yeah, on the 12th too.
Man, I think he's bringing up good points. Like, is there yearly stuff? When does it happen? What's the process every year? Like, there's a lot to this that we haven't really fleshed out yet. That I think that deserves, being figured out. So.
Right. I mean, do you get an inspection, or do you need to get a new license? Right. Those are important issues.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else from the board? Okay. Thank you for the conversation and direction.
it might be helpful if Erica passed those questions from Attorney Cohen on to Katie, if that's all right, through the chair. I asked that question.
Okay. Committee reports, comments?
I got a couple of things, I guess. BPAC met. We're talking about more bike parking, more possibly bike corrals, looking for better locations. You know, the ones that are there are all fully used, and so we've been sort of working on where else can they go to make it easier to use them. And there's some suggestions that we may be coming and seeing soon. That's number one. Number two, there was an appointment. Cheryl Emery was not reappointed to Park and Rec, and I didn't realize that she wasn't reappointed. And I wouldn't have, so, you know, and our deadline to oppose that was August 4th or 6th. And it wasn't very clear to me that that was what was happening. So I want to talk about that in a future meeting and talk about a process that would lead to that sort of result without me understanding it. You guys may all have understood it, but I clearly did not.
Did she apply for it?
Yes, and she was, yeah, and she's very valued by Park and Rec. She's very valued by, what is it, the Capital Committee. She's on the CPC, and they have all voted. They miss her already. And so I just think we as, you know, when you have someone who is that devoted and putting that much time into something, I think they deserve more consideration.
We get an email from the town manager who said there's certain things that she can appoint. So we get the notice of the appointment, but we don't get the notice like we do for our own appointments about who applied.
Exactly.
So maybe I would recommend that we add that determination. So when we get that email, it says not only who, but also talks about who applied, because it's those emails come in the absence of any context.
That's my
Yeah.
point, but
Yeah,
it wasn't noticed tonight for a discussion. I don't think it's fair to bring it up with Libby not
Yeah.
here.
No, I
But I
understand,
think
yeah.
I think I'm in agreement.
Yeah.
We also received in our packet letters from some downtown, specifically one person, about the problem with delivery trucks and parking on sidewalks and then parking blocking roads and the lack of enforcement of that. I think it's an issue that we need to take up in some detail this winter. It has seemed to, it was tightened 10 or 15 years ago. It seems to be loosening again.
Did you see the email that went out from Chief Pittman to all the trucking companies?
Was that recent?
Yeah.
All right, I haven't seen that one.
So they started. So
All right,
it's at
good.
the end of the summer, but they started. We're gonna start enforcing.
Right, good.
And they gave guidelines.
Really
Okay.
good. It will, because those guys will do it. But it's, in the midst of digging all this stuff up, in this parking on sidewalks, I have a file with stuff I find interesting that I've saved from previous things. And in my file is a 1980 discussion from the traffic safety about sidewalk parking. So I have one from 80, I have one from 90 something, and it has been a constant thorn in our side that hasn't been corrected. It got cleaned up a little bit, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Did it specify that there's some, I don't know if it's written or it's just kind of urban legend that you have to have the width of a baby carriage?
It had the width and it had one wheel up and the baby carriage thing. I think it was in that one. So I think I don't think it's urban legend. I think it's a 1980 decree.
Because that will get you a buy from your parking ticket. If you
But
how wide a
do you
baby carriage?
measure the baby carriage? Because I used to have a pretty large double jogger.
Right.
And then the only I don't know. And then the only other one, there was a NPDC on Monday, and there was a motion made, and surprisingly I didn't make it, and I didn't even plan to bring this up, but someone else made a motion because we've talked about the traffic, sort of having traffic modeling. We've discussed it here a little bit, and there was a motion made and passed unanimously at NPDC to have Mike Burns figure out and come back to that group in a month or so with what it would take to actually model traffic here. It's not something that may happen overnight, but what would it take to model the island? How would we do that? What are the costs? Well, who do you have to hire? So I think that there's some pretty serious concerns after this summer with some of the things going on. And, for a friend 45 minutes from Amelia Drive through Five Corners about a week ago, 45 minutes, it was backed up and locked up everywhere for like an hour and a half. And so, sort of my concern has been, great, we're going to move, you're going to move, if you have the difference between a four-way stop and a rotary is about 25%. So we're going to move the cars through 25% quicker. It's going to be safer, which is why I support them. But then if we move it 25% quicker, what happens at Five Corners on Washington Street and on Union Street and on Prospect and Caton Circle? Those are all interconnected. And so I think that, I think the NPDC members recognize that there's a little bit more we have to understand, especially if we're going to be asking for some of these outlays. So there are my things.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say CPC met yesterday and we'll be gearing up for fall deliberations on probably some great applications, September, October.
The Board of Health spent a fair amount of time at our last meeting talking about tick-borne disease, the prevalence this year compared to prior years. We also saw a lot of statistics on the size of the deer herd around, on an annual basis, kind of like before and after and during the various kinds of deer hunt, shotgun, and bow seem to have had some pretty significant impact, especially the bow, extra season for bow hunting. But like everything else, it's there's a lot of complexity to it. There's not what you really weren't able to draw a lot of conclusions from it, and still really unclear about not coming forward yet with any specific recommendations for additional, extending the seasons or whatever. But we're also fair amount of complexity in looking at the different kinds of new tick-borne diseases, the implications of having the Lone Star tick now moving into our area. It's now on Tuckanut, has not have been seen on Nantucket, and that brings a whole host of other tick-borne diseases that would be problematic to us. So it's tick-borne diseases are becoming more prevalent, and there's a potential for additional predator. I'm not sure what ticks are called, predators, whatever, entering into our environment.
On that, I had a customer that came in from somewhere down south who had been bitten by a Lone Star tick, and he became allergic to meat.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's what. Yeah.
it was, and he was describing. So he had a bunch of questions about what we served and what he could eat and what he couldn't eat, and he was telling me about it. And it took him 2 or 3 years for them to diagnose that he even had it, because it's sort of, they didn't realize what was happening. It was.
You get a very, very tough reaction to it, and it may go away. But interestingly, the people now who are becoming more and more concerned about is the meatpacking industries, because of the implications of their business. Earlier in the week, the gentleman, the vice president of real estate for National Grid, was out here in a meeting with him. He was talking how tick-borne disease is now one of the highest incidences of health issues for his company in this region, because of where his employees are out and how they work, and how that's becoming a real problem for them.
Yeah, Affordable Housing Trust. We had our regular meeting, as well as I think it's the 4th session with Judy Barrett. At the regular meeting, one of the interesting items was the Nantucket data platform and the opportunity to work with them to ask 2 questions. What these may get tweaked, but one of the ones that came out of discussion, the 2 that came out of discussion, were understanding the housing stock and the availability and what exists, what we have, and as well then really getting down into the details a little bit more about the demand and who people are. A lot of people that would be looking for affordable housing aren't on a lot of the list of the typical places where you'd be able to pull the data from. So they might be able to help us with their mobility, the way they use the mobility in the mobile phones and things like that. And then in the strategic planning session, we are just moving closer to developing. At this point, we're really identifying the role and the role the Affordable Housing Trust will play, as well as defining how we can be a leader, more of a leader really than what we have been. So we're getting there, and again, we should have the final product by the end of September. And that's it.
I have nothing to report because I missed all my meetings last week because I came down with the tick-borne disease. So there I just pulled it all together. Anaplasma, 19 years. There you go. Yeah, I think that's it for select board reports and comments. If you don't mind, I'd like to suggest a 2 or 3 minute break before we get into the public hearings, just really quick.
Sure.
I think that's part of it.
I think before we were accepting people to come live and work with us, if they've been in and out of the courts, for 10 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I'd like to know it. I don't, and it seems to me that you just, all you have, if all you're asking for, have there been any court determinations about you? Like, that has to be public knowledge.
Yeah, I'm not.
That goes through the CCC. So
Yeah,
the
some of
Cannabis
that they
Control
get, yeah.
Commission runs,
What?
the Cannabis Control Commission runs all of that sort of
They do
background
that?
check. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. And
I mean,
the,
this is Massachusetts with crooked politicians.
Well, the goal, and part of the goal is to help some of those people become legal businesses.
if they had
There's
a
group in-
marijuana-related offense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So part of it, that's part of what, one of the stated goals of Massachusetts is to help make some of those people who've had just marijuana offenses do it
I'd
legally.
like to know about hard drug use. too.
I
But
don't
I
think
think-
they would get past the Cannabis
No, they
Control
wouldn't.
Commission. That's the way it should work. And not to say that we couldn't have a backup question, but my understanding is that they wouldn't.
But the people those that they're targeting are having a hard time because they've already been locked out because of the Boston zoning. The guys with the money have already locked up the locations in the neighborhoods. So now there's a big battle going on between those people that we're talking about that, we're hoping this would bring them and their community up, and the people who have gotten the locations to begin with. It's interesting. Nothing works the way you think it will.
Actually, I should read that. I think Strauss gave me her name on the 24th. No, you're going to run
I'm going to open my house with lots of trust defiance. And
Twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. 13 weeks.
Not too late.
It's a kind of
Should have
expensive.
told you to show up and surprise you.
It's like a freebie. I mean, I'm not getting paid or anything. Yeah, but it's good.
Okay, thank you for that break. Okay, we're on to the public hearings. This is the second part of the public hearings. I talked to town council before the meeting and said it would be okay to open both public hearings at the same time because the shed and the hardscaping are somewhat intertwined. I wouldn't want to not be able to talk about the hardscaping without the shed. So we're going to open up public hearings 1 and 2. Consider the appeal of G. Phillip and Barbara Nowak of the Historic District Commission approval of the CA for the shed and the hardscaping regarding property located at 1 Sunset Ridge out in Sconset. Just to go over the procedure really quick with everyone, and I'd like to have town council also come up. There's a very particular procedure for this type of appeal. I've already opened the public hearing. We'll have the appellant will state their case and the reason for the appeal. I'd like to give up to 10 minutes on that. And then the HDC can define their position, 10 minutes for that, and then there'll be rebuttals at that point from the appellant and the commission. Then after that, there'll be public comment, and we'll do 2 minutes for public comment, ask for people not to keep repeating themselves in the same thing. If that starts happening, we'll stop the public comment, and then I will invite questions from the board and close the public hearing at that point, and then we will make a decision. When we make the decision, we will do them separately, but we will have both public hearings open at the same time. Is that correct, town council? That's fine? Okay. So the public hearing is open. Would the appellant like to come up? Just please state your name.
My name is Phil Novak. My wife Barbara is here with me this evening. And we are, I guess, the appellants bringing both of these appeals, and we appreciate the opportunity to make short statements in support of our case. We'd like to indicate at the outset that these appeals, both of them, involve much more than a simple dispute between neighbors over the construction of a shed and hardscaping. They raise issues that are very troubling and that we believe the Select Board needs to address. First, the appeals involve the HDC's approval of the shed and hardscaping in blatant disregard of the Commission's very own rules and the law under which it's governed. Second, the appeals involve the HDC's approval of the shed and hardscaping, despite the fact that applicant repeatedly made and submitted, under oath and in violation of the law, false and misleading statements and information in connection with his applications to the Commission. The special act establishing the Historic District Commission makes it this board's responsibility to ensure that the HDC's rulings approving construction of the shed and hardscaping are in accordance with the Commission's rules and the law and are correct. They are not, and the Select Board should reverse the HDC's rulings. The Select Board must make clear that the Commission must and will be required to abide by its rules and the law by which it is governed. The Select Board also must make clear that the applications of applicants submitting false and misleading information to the Commission will be denied and the applicants punished as provided by law. Let's first consider the HDC's approval of the construction of the shed. The HDC meeting and application schedule provides, and I quote, "All applications must be submitted to the HDC office no later than noon on a deadline day." The meeting deadline for the HDC meeting on May 29, 2018 was May 22nd. Applicant submitted his application for the shed on May 23rd, one day after the meeting deadline. Applicant submitted his plans for the shed on May 25, 3 days after the meeting deadline. The HDC was precluded under its own rules from considering applicant's application for construction of the shed at its May 29th meeting, but nevertheless it did so. The Commission also was precluded under its own rules from considering and approving applicant's application at its old business meeting on June 5. Under its rules, the earliest the Commission could have considered the application and shed plans was at its next new business meeting on June 12th. The Commission considered and approved applicant's application for construction of the shed at its meeting on June 5th, and its consideration and approval was in blatant violation of its own rules. This alone is a sufficient reason for the Select Board to reverse the HDC's ruling approving construction of the shed. The HDC had before it the construction of a 10 by 13 foot shed to be built 10 feet from applicant's property line along New Street in Sconset. The shed would tower more than 27 feet above street level with nothing to screen it from view. The Sconset Advisory Board objected to the shed. We objected to the shed. Applicant's neighbors and Sconset residents objected to the shed. Everyone objected to the visual impact the shed would have on them and on travelers along New Street. And most importantly, even applicant David Wilsey conceded that the shed would be a, quote, eyesore, close quote, without adequate mature plantings. There was no viable plan before the Commission when it approved construction of the shed to hide it from view in order to mitigate its overwhelming visual impact. The HDC cannot now rely on applicant's false and misleading representation in his hardscaping plan that he would hide the eyesore from view by screen planting on property along New Street owned by the town of Nantucket. The commission should have known or determined before approving the shed that applicant's representation was not true and correct. He did not have permission to put the screen planting on the town property, as he said under oath that he would do. The commission's ruling approving the shed is unacceptable and clearly erroneous, and the select board should reverse it for this reason as well. Moving now to the appeal of the HDC's ruling with respect to the hardscaping. This chronology is even more interesting. At its meeting on June 19th, 2018, the HDC held applicant's application for hardscaping, quote, for more information, revisions, and for the Sconset Advisory Board to review the changes. The meeting deadline for the HDC's July 12th meeting was July 3rd. Applicant submitted a revised hardscaping plan on July 5th, 2 days after the meeting deadline. Applicant then presented a modified version of his hardscaping plan to the Sconset Advisory Board at its meeting on July 11th. 8 days after the meeting deadline, it was not clear that this version of the plan was ever submitted to the HDC. Finally, applicant submitted a further revised hardscaping plan only hours before the HDC's meeting on July 12th. The HDC considered and approved at its July 12th meeting the revised hardscaping plan that applicants submitted that morning, 9 days after the meeting deadline, and a day after showing a different plan to the Sconset Advisory Board. The HDC's consideration and approval of applicants' hardscaping at its July 12th meeting, again, was in blatant violation of its own rules. Under these circumstances, how can the Select Board not reverse the HDC's ruling? It should do so for this reason alone. Furthermore, and just as importantly, applicant signed his application to the HDC for the hardscaping, quote, under penalties of perjury, close quote. The crime of perjury includes making false statements or providing false information after being sworn to tell the truth. Section 10 of the Special Act establishing the Historic District Commission provides that, and I quote, it shall be a violation of this act for any person to knowingly submit false, fraudulent, or misleading information to the commission in connection with any application. Applicant knew that he did not have permission to put the screen planting on the town property. Nevertheless, applicant repeatedly made statements and submitted information under oath and in violation of the law, knowingly and falsely and misleadingly representing that he would put screen planting on the town property along New Street to hide the shed. At the Sconset Advisory Board meeting on July 11, 2018, applicant conceded that his representations were false and misleading. He advised the board that he had just talked with the DPW 1.5 months after filing his application and was told that he could not put screen planting on the town property as he represented. At the same meeting, applicant showed the Sconset Advisory Board a hardscaping plan on which he stated, quote, remove zoning shed, 10 3/4 feet by 12 3/4 feet. He told the board that the shed would be removed, but clearly applicant never intended to remove the shed, and his representations to the board were false and misleading. The very next day, only hours before the HDC meeting, applicant submitted a further revised hardscaping plan from which he had deleted his representation to the Sconset Advisory Board the day before that he would remove the shed. For this reason as well, the Select Board should reverse the ruling of the HDC and direct the Commission to enforce the law. 2 final points. The Sconset Advisory Board, as we understand, is an agency of the town of Nantucket. The applications applicants submitted for review by the board were submitted under oath and under the law. Those applications included false and misleading information. The applicant also made false and misleading statements to the board, most significantly at its meeting on July 11, 2018, when he told the board that he would remove the shed. We believe it important that the Select Board get the input of the Sconset Advisory Board before rendering its decisions on these appeals. And finally, since the applicant, Mr. Wilsey, has criticized us for doing what we can to preserve the historic village of Sconset, let me provide a bit of background. My wife and I have restored the house at 30 New Street, where we live, across from the old Sconset schoolhouse. It is the house in which the Holgates started their laundry business when Mrs. Holgate began taking in and doing laundry in the kitchen. We have built a small house at 5A West Sankaty Road for our children and grandchildren. We have restored and are preserving 2 Sconset cottages located at 8 and 33 West Sankaty Road. We have turned the 4 building lots at the corner of West Sankaty Road and New Street into the Field of Dreams, where the kids today play baseball, on the same field used by the children who attended the Sconset School in the early 1990s. We are now restoring the house across the street from Mr. Wilsey, which was a stable where Nantucket residents kept their horses, which they rode through the moors before they had lunch at the Chanticleer. The stable was converted to a house in the early 1990s. We are trying to do our part. We are here this evening to ask the Select Board to do its part to help us preserve this very special historic village. Thank you again for your time and careful consideration.
Thank you. HGC? Sure.
Hi, I'm Ray Pohl, Chairman of the HCC. I was present for both of those applications. So I'm going to speak to some of the ideas that were just put forth. And John Hedden, who is our administrator, will address some of the logistical things in terms of filing deadlines and that sort of thing. So just a few random notes on this. One thing is about the screening. So we have the shed application and we have the hardscape application, 2 separate things. One thing that I remember, now the appellant has said that the shed is 10 feet off of the property line, which is true. So that 10 feet allows for planting that is clearly on Mr. Woolsey's property. And that is the large planting that's now in place that I believe is arborvitae or whatever, and largely screens the shed from New Street. The planting that was taking place on the town property, which is basically the easement that isn't New Street but is part of the town property, was erroneous in my belief, and I believe in the belief of the rest of the board. And we told the applicant that he couldn't screen the retaining walls that he was requesting as part of his hardscape application using town property. So he came in with a revised plan that pushed the retaining walls back onto the property, onto his property, so that he could screen the retaining walls as seen from New Street. So that was one thing I wanted to clear up. The second is the shed. We approve probably 5 or 6 sheds at every meeting, every Tuesday night. And this shed is no different than any other shed that we've ever approved. I think the distinction in this case is the fact that it sits on the hill where the old water tower used to sit. And anything, when you're looking at something on that hill relative, as you're standing on New Street, it's all going to be above New Street. I mean, the driveway is above New Street. So the shed itself is 15 feet 3 inches high, which if you look through our records, you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of sheds that are that size. So this shed is not uncharacteristic of any other shed that we approve. And the story with the retainage was that we basically talked back and forth about it. We wanted them to push it back. And one of the assurances that the applicant gave us was that the retaining walls that are down closest to New Street would be screened in perpetuity. John Hedden does a sign off at the end of the project. And one of the conditions is when he goes to do the sign off that you won't be able to see those retaining walls because there will be sufficient planting not to be able to see them. So I will say one thing. I'm going to sort of cross over with what John has to say about procedural stuff. And there is this issue of plans being presented. There are filing deadlines, obviously. But there's also, the HUC is accepted if you're going before one of our advisory boards, Sconset Advisory, Nantucket Advisory, they meet the day before and they review what's been submitted the week before. And so oftentimes the applicant will go to that advisory board and the advisory board will say, well, gosh, it would be better if you move the shed back or you drop the ridge or whatever. And so we as a board, the HDC, accepts if the applicant comes in on a Tuesday night with fresh plans that will supersede the ones that have been submitted by the filing deadline if they incorporate changes that are for the better, just so that we can expedite things. So that's as much as I'll say about filing deadlines. I think, John, are you prepared to talk about the rest of the...
I think we'll have questions later. But is anything, if you want to defend your position or anything you want to make sure we want to know procedurally or anything, is now the time to do that.
Okay. So, John Hedden, land use specialist for the town. I want to make one first distinction about our filing deadlines and that stuff. So we have a new business filing deadline, which is typically noon on Wednesdays. That's an office thing. If there's bigger projects, you're guaranteed to be on the next week's agenda if you submit everything by Wednesday at noon. Sometimes there's little applications that roll in on a Thursday, like a roof color change or something in Fairgrounds Road or something, and I say, that's okay, we can bump it up to this agenda because I feel it's a small application. The notification to the public of applications is the agenda being posted. So that's the notification. The meeting deadline, as far as I am concerned, is for our office to have time to go through the applications, type up the agenda, type up the advisory board agendas. So as far as new business deadline, that's for the office. So, and the agenda is the public notice. So like to clear that part up from the start. Other concerns, I'm not quite sure that I can't even really.
I'd ask one of the comments is that there's false.
Quick question.
Well,
do we ask questions now or do we save them? Are we okay to ask questions now? Okay. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and maybe even before I ask this question, I should ask my other question, which is, we received some information today with photos, and it wasn't in the packet, and so I don't want to. Erica sent to us, and so before we get too far along, I want to make sure that we aren't doing something. If this becomes a court case, I want to make sure that we're not proceeding improperly.
Just so you know, before I sent it to the board, I consulted with town council. Okay. He advised me that it was okay to share it with you, and it was your purview whether or not you wanted to consider it, and I put that in the email.
You did,
I also shared it with the HTC as well as the appellant.
Okay, so everyone has seen it?
Yes.
Okay, but I want to make sure that isn't going to be grounds for anything before we. That's good. So we're safe.
Did you have a question for John then?
I do, but I want to clear this one up
Okay.
first, because if this goes further, if we make a decision one way or the other, and there's, something happening later, I don't want to have us tied up over something procedural. If we all agree it's okay, then we move on.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. George Pucci from Town Council's office. I just wanted to add to what Erica said to Mr. Fee's question. A submission did come in from the property owner who has the permits, and he submitted some material, and he also submitted a photograph of what it appears to be today. I forget what day that came in, but it was after the deadline that you would typically put procedurally, but that's your procedure so that board members can be prepared for these hearings. Seeing though that it was information that the appellant probably had not seen, I did advise Erica to provide that to the appellant so that he would be prepared, if he wanted to address any of that in the event you accepted it, so that he could say anything he had to say about that tonight. So he has the opportunity to do that tonight. He also has the opportunity, if he hasn't had a chance to really look at it, to request a continuance, continue your public hearing. So procedurally, we made sure that in the event you did accept those materials, that the appellant would have a reasonable opportunity to deal with those in whatever way he saw fit.
So do we need to make a decision about accepting that now before we proceed with anything else, or I'd ask?
And we may not have to form, I guess the question is
I'd ask through the chair of town council.
Do we need to accept this?
You don't need to accept it. You can accept it. It's within your discretion to accept it. If you do accept it, it becomes formally part of the record that's before you, and that would be the record of underlying your decision, part of the record before you. If you had a chance to see it, the appellant has had a chance to see it. It's certainly not new information in terms of what was before the HDC. As it appears now would be the only new information, but that's, would be relevant, I would think, for your consideration. So I don't see a reason why you would not accept it. But again, it would be within your discretion whether or not to do that.
Okay. So does it make sense for us to make a motion to accept it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Is it Mr. Novak?
I think we wanted to deal with this issue first.
Okay.
I'd ask the chair of that.
Okay.
What do you? We need you to decide that.
Will somebody like to make a motion to accept it?
I'll make a motion to accept the material we received today.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Is there a second? Okay, so we don't, there's no motion there.
I'll second it.
Second? Okay. Any discussion?
So I didn't read it because I read the other documents that said you can't add anything, and I didn't have that conversation that it had gone to town council. But I'll take a look at it. I'm not in favor of it. I'm just telling you that I didn't review it because I read your instructions. So
I did want to note one thing about the materials. We're spending a lot of time on it. They're not, they don't have the oomph that you might think that they do. The fact that they were submitted after your deadline doesn't mean that they're overly relevant. They really don't add much to what Chairman Pohl had to say about what the decision entailed in terms of its substance. I think definitely the only new information really for you in there would be the photograph as it shows the construction as it appears today. It would certainly be new information, and it's one photograph in there. So.
Okay.
And I would just ask a procedural question. I purposely I didn't know we were going to take questions. They were as we were going through. I thought the appellant and the HDC were just making their testimony, and then we would ask questions later. I would have had questions for Mr. Nowak if that was the way you wanted to run it, but we probably should clarify that too.
town council looked at me and said it was okay for us to take questions during the hearings.
Right.
So
But
there'll
we
be,
didn't have
there'll
that
be a rebuttal,
information.
and you can ask him,
Okay.
Mr. Novak, questions. So the motion on hand is, do we accept these? That's what was sent yesterday. So there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No, I'm abstaining. I wanted to ask a question of Mr. Novak before I decided whether to accept it or not, but that's all right.
Okay. So they're accepted.
Yes.
I gotta read them.
Okay. You guys still have a
Start
couple-
reading, Jim.
Still had a couple more minutes. Anything else from the HTC, or did you want to ask a question to John?
Yeah, so what typically happens if there are, one of the claims is false statements, punishable by law. Do you encounter that often in your, A, were there false statements, A, and B, if there are, what happens?
Well, I think there were some clarifications made on the plans, especially for the hardscaping, that was seen by the HDC. I think that's important to observe that everything was seen by the HDC, all the plans. I believe it was June 19th. I read minutes. Chairman Pohl pointed out that he thought that the plantings were on town property. So there was discussion of that by the commission. It was noticed. And I believe at that meeting, the application was held for more information specifically about plantings on town property. And I believe the applicant also, the HDC, advised that the applicant come back with more information about that and speak to the DPW, I believe, Mr. McNeil, about the plantings. So that was addressed at a meeting, so.
Yeah, please.
So I think the bottom line is, we were certainly, as a board, we were certainly not aware if Joe, by the way, Joe's here, so he can take this question too. We weren't aware that Joe was making a false statement putting plantings on town property, but it did come to our notice. And in fact, Joe, if memory serves me, you weren't the applicant that night. It may have been Linda Williams. So in any case, we remedied the problem. It wasn't like the false statement led to an erroneous thing that we approved and that the wall is going to be visible. The bottom line is we said, well, you can't really rely on town property or a neighbor's property for your screening. It has to be on your property. And so Joe and his group moved the walls back. And again, we're talking about the screening for the two little retaining walls, not for the shed, because that is clearly on the private property. Right. So the bottom line is, whatever Joe's intentions were, we reached a satisfactory result.
The process, you worked through the process to move it where it needed to be. Okay.
So Joseph Topham, we're gonna bring up a photo that Mr. Nowak provided. 244 on the packet.
This isn't the same.
All right, so it's near the end.
I have an easy question while she's looking. What is a zoning shed?
It's under 200 square feet, so it doesn't count as ground cover.
Gotcha, okay.
It's just a matter of, it gets issued by the zoning
Gotcha.
enforcement officer versus the building, like the building inspector.
Joe, can you introduce yourself? People.
Again, Joseph Topham.
What's your involvement?
So I'm the architectural designer for the project. Originally, there was another landscape architect involved, and for some reason, she didn't want to go further because it became a little problematic. So I came forward and decided to do the drawings. But on the photo that is provided is the original copse of trees that was on New Street, and all we were trying to do. Next one. So if you look at the top picture, you can see this is looking up New Street. There's a copse of trees up here. So that's all on town property. So all we want to do was just put those trees back. It was just a screening. We weren't going to get any more yard. We were going to have a retaining wall, and we were going to have 8 feet of planting at the first iteration. of planting on top of the Wilson project. The rest was just to put back that vegetation that was there on top of, on town property. Nothing more, we weren't gaining anything, we weren't trying to be mischievous, we weren't trying to lie to anyone, there was no deceit. I spoke to Mr. McNeil's office, we told them what we were gonna do, they said that's fine. Mr. Nowak then went and saw Mr. McNeil, and then he saw my plan, and he said, you know what, Joe, let's not do that, let's just remove that. So we went before the board of the HCC and said, we're gonna move back, we're gonna instead have one tall retaining wall, screened with, 10 feet of vegetation, we're gonna break it into 2 walls and then screen it, so that's what we did.
Okay.
There was no sleight of hand of anything.
Thank you, Joe.
Can I ask one question?
To Joe.
Yes. Was there permission to cut them down in the first place, or would it be normal to, if you take them down, then you'd have to replace them?
It was access getting onto the property. It's a very small lot. It's about 5,000 square feet. The way is 10 feet wide. So trying to get a machine, trying to get a crane on the property because it was a Huntington home. We had an agreement with the butter, but the backfill was put on that property just for parking, and we didn't feel that the crane would be stable in that area. So we removed them, and then we were just going to replace them. That's what our intention was to do.
Erica?
I would say, through experience and observation, that it's a pretty normal procedure where some landscaping is taken away and then put back after construction is finished.
Okay. We might be getting a little outside the beyond, but is there anything else the HCC like to talk about their position before we go?
I'm going to start from the beginning, hopefully try and make everything clear. So the hardscaping application came in, I don't know, May 22nd or something like that. I remember specifically late on Wednesday, Mr. Topham's office came in with their shed application. And they said, shoot, we didn't file our shed application. Is it okay if we get on this agenda? And I said, yeah, that's okay, because it's going to be with the hardscaping of the property. Commissioners have voiced before that they like to see hardscaping applications with structures, because that way, in this case perfectly, retaining walls and that type of stuff. So I felt it was a good thing. Unfortunately, that meant the shed application didn't make it to the Sconset Advisory Board's review. So they weren't able to review the shed with the hardscaping application. But I felt the HDC, it was important to them to review both applications at the same time so they could see everything that was going on. So procedurally, that wasn't a good thing in our office, but the end result is it all went to the commission and was reviewed and publicly noticed, and everything in that context was done correctly. So I guess that's where things start with submitting applications and all that type of stuff. So,
Sure.
And this is a newer site, definitely. It's the last property which is located within the Sconset Village, the core district. I believe the house directly across the street, up towards New Street, was built in 2004. The other one next up Burnell Street was 1984. So it's a fairly new area that's being built. So I think that's something also to keep in mind with this project.
So is there do applications go to the HDC without necessarily going to their respective advisory boards?
Yes, it happens.
Okay.
It's happened in the past. I saw applications from 2014 where the same
Okay.
thing
All right,
happened.
thank
And, it's very unfortunate.
I understand,
They
yeah.
do value the advisory boards, and it's great that there's another set of eyes to review plans and take comments. But, at the end of the day, we're sitting here because of the HDC. So, I mean, that's the end.
Anything else from the HCC? Okay, there'll be a chance to rebuttal. We might a little later. Okay, rebuttal, Mr. Nowak? The shorter we keep the rebuttals, the more we can do.
Just a couple of quick points. First of all, as far as the information that came in yesterday from Mr. Wilsey, we've seen it. we don't have an objection to it. It doesn't address the issues that we've raised in our appeal, and its town council agrees it's nothing of particular significance. Secondly, with respect to Mr. Fee and the select board generally, when you make a false statement or provide false information, you violated the law. They did it on 3 occasions over a period of a month and a half. You can't then stand up and say, I'm sorry, I made false and misleading statements and I will correct them and I will do something different. You have violated the law, and when the law is violated, that application should have been summarily denied. And there should have been prohibitions against resubmitting a new application under those circumstances. What does the law mean? What does it mean when you file under penalties of perjury? Once you file under oath under penalties of perjury and you've made a false statement, you've violated the law. Secondly, there's been a lot of talk about the shed and how it looks and where it came from. The facts that I set forth tonight, and you can look at our pleadings in much more detail with the exhibits, those all come from the HDC's files and from the website where you get the minutes of their meetings. You can see exactly what happened and how they proceed. And it has got to stop. And someone has to stand up and say, this is not the way you're supposed to operate. This is not what your rules say, and this is not what the law says. And it's the same thing with respect to applicants. They put the planting on town property because it's a 5,000 square foot lot. He is overbuilt on the lot. He has very little lawn, and he figured if he got away with putting the screening planting on town property, he would save himself some land. Yes, the HDC, 2 or 3 meetings later, all of a sudden it dawned on him that perhaps that was not permissible. I knew it wasn't permissible. We've lived in Wisconsin for 40 years. You know you don't build on town property. I checked with the DPW, and they checked with the DPW, and they found out that, in fact, if they had checked before they filed their application, they would have known it. A call to the DPW. It's pretty hard to believe that a developer doesn't know you can't put landscaping on town property. So I think what you have to look at is a lot of talk here about what it looks like now and how the screening. Take a look at exhibits 15, 16, 17. And what the shed looks like and where it's located. And yes, it's only 15 feet tall, but when you put it on the hill, it towers 27 feet above the street. And there may be lots of sheds that they have approved, but one 27 feet above New Street, 10 feet from the property line? We have a shed, but it's in the back corner of our yard, so people can't see it. So I think that this board really needs to take a careful look at these 2 appeals. Because if you don't do anything, it's going to be clear that the HDC can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, regardless of its rules and the law. And it's going to be clear that applicants can come in and say anything. And if they get caught, they change their tune and they get away with it. He just happened to not get away with it this time. So I would very much appreciate, again, this is much more than a shed and hardscaping. This is the way in which this agency operates, and this is the way in which applicants operate, and this select board, under the statute, is supposed to review how the agency, the commission, and the applicants operate and make sure it doesn't happen. And I appreciate your time very much. We're long residents of Wisconsin. We're long residents of Nantucket. We love this island, and we want to make sure that the historic nature and fabric is preserved. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for my...
Thank you. Would you like to respond? You okay?
Very short.
Okay. I have a question for town council after this.
I'm just going to respond to the town property issue, the fact of putting screening on town property. First thing is, Joe's not the first person that we've had come into one of our meetings and have erroneously placed screening on either town property or the neighbor's property. And it's easy to tell, we move it back, Joe moved it back. Further, I was sitting here thinking, and I used to own a house on Pleasant Street, and I really wanted a hedge on the corner, Lion Street. But where the hedge had to go was actually on town property. So I went to the DPW and I said, I'd love to have a hedge on my property. And they said, that's fine, as long as you keep it 30 inches high or less, so that when people are coming down Lion Street and they're getting on to Pleasant, that they can actually see the traffic there. So
it's no longer 30 inches high. It needs to be cut back.
Oh, you mean the one that's there on Lion Street? Well, it looks terrible. It needs fertilizer. But my point is that, if Joe went to the DPW and they said, oh, well, that would be great, plant some plantings there, which was one possible answer. Apparently, the answer was no. And so Joe changed his application. And again, I've said it 5 minutes ago, the HDC and Joe reached the conclusion that he moved the walls back and provide sufficient planting to conceal the walls. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Pucci, could you just give us a little bit of direction on what we are deciding here tonight?
Sure. I'll start out on the false and misleading statements. So that was also a question from one of your board members, and there was some talk about it. And so what I'm citing from is the special legislation for the HDC is your act, establishing the district basically everywhere as a district. This is a special concern district, like your downtown. So that's what the HDC is governed by, and it also governs your standard of review on these appeals. So that language about false and misleading statements is the act provides that it's a violation of the act for any person to knowingly submit false, fraudulent, or misleading information to the commission in connection with any application. So really, in terms of relevance for you, that has limited relevance because you kind of have a two-pronged question there is, number one, is there evidence that the applicant knowingly, and that's a pretty high standard, knowingly submitted false, fraudulent, or misleading information to the commission? You heard from members of the commission and the applicant's consultant about that issue, that they did not feel that there was false and misleading information that was submitted. Aside from that question, even if you found that there was false or misleading information submitted, the relevance for you on appeal would be is a basis for the HDC's decision fraudulent information? In other words, was there something underlying their decision that they relied on that was false and misleading? And what is that evidence? And does that give you grounds to send it back to them and say, you didn't know about this, or you should reconsider it? What is that information that was given to them in a false or misleading way? So really, the only relevance on appeal is if, number one, there is knowing false information, and number two, did knowing false information somehow underlie the basis for their granting the certificate of appropriateness to this homeowner? And just a little bit of guidance, and you've heard this many times. There are new members of the board who haven't heard my prepared speech about your jurisdiction in these matters. So there's two things going on. Is the Act imposes a standard, basically a performance standard on the HDC that they have to follow when they're determining whether they should issue a certificate of appropriateness or not. And that's relevant to you in determining whether or not they followed that procedure, that performance standard that they have. And just briefly from the Act, what the HDC considers in these cases
they pass on appropriateness of a building or exterior architectural features. And in passing on those, they shall consider, among other things, the general design, arrangement, texture, material, and color of the building or structure in question, the location on the lot, and the relation of such factors to similar features of buildings and structures in the immediate surroundings, and the position of such building or structure in relation to the street or public way, and to other buildings and structures. So that's basically the standard that they're applying. If they're have an application for proposed hardscaping or this proposed shed, they look at it in connection with the surrounding area. They look at setting on the lot, where it's located, if it's properly screened, how it appears from the public way. These are the things that they're looking at on a factual basis in their hearing. Then if anybody's so then they issue a ruling. They take that standard into account, and they issue a ruling whether or not this proposed exterior architectural feature or building is appropriate. They issued their decision. Then Section 11 of the Act, that talks about the appeal procedure to you. And the Act specifically then refers to the Select Board at that point as well. Appeals may be taken to the Board of Selectmen, now the Select Board, by any person aggrieved by the ruling of the Historic District Commission. And there's not much of a standard that the Act itself imposes on you. It just says that the Board of Selectmen shall hear and act upon such appeals promptly, and the decision of the board shall be as determined by a majority vote of the members of the board. So at that point, so you're issuing a decision on this party who claims aggrievement by the ruling of that Historic District Commission. The Act itself doesn't give you guidance about the standard that you're supposed to apply on those appeals, but there is case law. And the beauty of Nantucket is you have a lot of seminal case law that applies across the state. You're kind of in the forefront of issues like this. So the seminal case that's cited by many more municipalities even than Nantucket, but it did involve Nantucket, is a 1977 decision of the Supreme Judicial Court, Gumley versus Board of Selectmen of Nantucket. And that's cited by many parties involving any type of appeal involving a Historic District Commission. And what the Supreme Judicial Court held there is that the court elaborated on the standard that you're to apply in these appeals. And the Supreme Judicial Court held that the HDC's ruling should not be overturned unless it is based on a legally untenable ground, some type of a legal ground, like they went outside their jurisdiction, they applied wetlands law or something to their application. A legally untenable ground, or is unreasonable, whimsical, capricious, or arbitrary. So it's a high standard for you to overturn this commission. And the other thing that the SJC said is that the Board of Selectmen is not to substitute its judgment for that of the HDC. You have a local commission that is charged with this. They have a certain makeup in terms of their membership with their areas of expertise related to this historic commission review. So you are not to substitute your judgment for that of the commission. Even if you disagree with the conclusion, you still can't overturn them unless it falls within that standard that's required, that they were unreasonable, whimsical, capricious, or arbitrary. And basically, that arbitrary and capricious test means that there's no evidence on the record before them that a reasonable mind would deem necessary to support it. So in summary, that's the standard that you're applying. That's the standard in terms of the relevance, if any, that you find about alleged false and misleading statements. So it's basically up to you now to determine whether or not the HDC's ruling was arbitrary and capricious.
Can we ask questions of George? Is there any standard on what an aggrieved party is?
Aggrieved party was interesting in the last few years. Aggrieved party, I'm sure, you're all involved in municipal public official duties, and you've seen this issue come up in terms of land use permitting. A party aggrieved, it's a special term of art. And basically what it goes to is standing of a party to either file an appeal of a underlying permitting decision to an administrative board like yourself, or also standing to appeal a permit in court. So that's what it goes to about party aggrieved. Typically, you have to be aggrieved in terms of a aggrievement that's personal to you, as an abutter or a surrounding, an abutter to an abutter, or whatever your personal aggrievement is, over and above what an alleged aggrievement would be to the community at large.
Okay.
So that's something that's come up in a few cases actually involving the Board of Selectmen and the Historic District Commission in the last few years, that were basically some litigation pursued by other parties, like an appellant of a certificate holder. There was some extensive litigation in the Montgomery case recently, 12 C Street, a Nantucket case. And Superior Court judges did issue rulings about standing and party aggrieved. And basically the long and the short of it is they appear to be following that land use permitting general rule that a party and a butter has presumptive standing.
Right.
But if it's challenged, then they have to show a particularized harm. So that's basically the standard that is being applied to the court in terms of a party aggrieved of the commission's decision, is that aggrievement over and above something that's also sensed by the community at large.
And do you want to take a position on whether this appellant is an aggrieved party and meets that standard or not?
It would be probably, the issue of standing is better raised and litigated in a court case than for you to make that determination and reject their appeal based on standing, rather than getting to the substantive merits on it. Particularized aggrievement really hasn't been made out in this case, but it's probably safer to get to the substance, I would think.
Thank you.
Jacob, one more rebuttal from Mr. Novak? Yes. And then we're going to open up for...
I guess I'm a little puzzled whether town council is arguing for the HDC or advising the select board. A couple of points. We own the property across the street and we got notice. They're required to provide notice to abutters and other people, and gave us standing, I assume, to participate in the HDC proceedings. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten a certified letter. Secondly, we've had no trial. We don't have Mr. Wilsey here. He wasn't on the stand, so you don't know what he thought or what he didn't think. But we do know that when he filed those applications, he knew he did not have permission to put the screen planting on town property. We knew that. And so when you look at the statute, did he knowingly provide false information? That's the only thing we know. Now, why? He hasn't testified. So you can't make any kind of judgment on that, but you know that he didn't have permission, and he said it anyway. Secondly, in addition to the statute, as I noted, he signed the application, which is the HDC's application, which says under penalties of perjury. And perjury, when you sign something under oath, you are obligated to take reasonable steps to determine what you are saying is true and correct. How difficult would it have been to pick up the phone and call the DPW and say, can I or can't I do it? Before he made the representation. So you have a statute on one hand, but you have this gentleman swearing under oath, under penalty of perjury, that in fact he could plant when he knew he did not have permission to do so. So we don't have a situation here where you can look at who testified to what under oath and what was their intentions. We have to look at the documents that were filed, what was said in the documents, and we know clearly. You could ask the director of the DPW who's here tonight, we know he did not call and ask whether he would have permission to do what he said he was going to do under oath.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna open this up to the public. Does anybody here like to speak to the public on this before we close the public hearing?
Good evening. I'll be brief. Kenneth Gullickson. We represent the property owner, Mr. Wilsey. I just want to emphasize, you've really heard this, but there are two applications, the shed and the hardscaping. They're different. The shed was approved on its own without condition. The screening was not an issue. The screening didn't come up until after that approval, so it really has nothing to do with the shed. The screening, the hardscape approval was based upon screening being located on his property. And to the final point, Mr. Topham said that he did consult with the DPW about putting the vegetation back. It seemed to be okay at the time, and then that was changed later, and it was moved. And that's what the decision was based upon. So there is a basis for it. It was not an arbitrary, capricious decision. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? A question for town council. If we close the public hearing, if we want to ask anybody a question, we can, correct?
You can. I would recommend keeping it open if you intended to do that.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out something that's also incorrect about this statement about standing. I do recommend that you do not base your decision on the issue of standing, because that's better litigated. But this issue about receiving notice or being an abutter or an abutter to an abutter, in a court case, that gives you presumptive standing, that you have stated a claim upon which relief can be granted. If that standing is then challenged, then it's the burden of that person whose standing is challenged to go ahead and show how they have a particularized harm. So I just want to be clear, the fact that they got notice under the HDC's decision doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be found to have had standing in a court case on appeal. I just wanted to clear up that issue.
Thank you. Does the board have any other questions for anybody before we close the public hearing?
I think you're being advised not to close the public hearing.
Okay.
I wouldn't close it in case we do have questions.
Or if
Okay.
you need to continue it for some reason.
Yeah.
I'm just going over the procedure, saying to close it, and then we make our decision.
I'm still thinking about if I have any questions.
Okay.
I'm just going to need a minute.
Okay,
So,
sure.
Okay.
Actually, I have a question for George. Going back to the Gumbling versus Board of Selectmen and those two, the unreasonable, whimsical, arbitrary, and then the legally untenable standards. The first 2 points that the appellant brought up, the deadlines, and then the perjury, the issue of intentional false representation. Those aren't really covered. They're not really relevant to those two standards. Then, is that correct?
No, the part about this internal application process and when they receive their application materials, that's more their internal rulemaking, so that members of that commission get materials in a timely manner and they have it, just like you get them on a certain time frame. Unless you were to convert that into something that, because of their failure to follow their own procedure, that somehow led to flawed information that underlied their decision, that really doesn't have any relevance for you. And the same thing with the alleged false statement. First of all, again, if an appellant is alleging a knowingly false statement, it's the appellant's burden to prove that an intentional false statement was made. And then if you're satisfied that they satisfied that burden of proof to you, then you have to also find, okay, there was false information that formed the basis of the HDC's ruling. Therefore, we really need to send it back because the HDC didn't really know what it was ruling on when it did it. That's the only way that comes up. In terms of a legally untenable decision, and that is exactly the language the Supreme Judicial Court uses, they gave an example, actually, in that case of, or this case law on it, a legally untenable basis for a ruling. There was they thought that there was, I forget how the building was basically too big, but there was no application of the criteria for that. So they just thought, now this building is just too big, so we're going to deny it. And so The SJC gave as an example, that could be a legally untenable reason for a ruling, that they based it on something that isn't criteria that's set forth in the act. Or something like an example that I gave, that they said, well, this building is okay by the Conservation Commission, so we'll approve it. You know, something like that, that goes to a legal criteria that is outside of their jurisdiction. That's really what you're talking about a legally untenable basis for their decision.
So if a building is too big, they have to say it's not in keeping with the neighborhood, it doesn't fit the, correct? If they have to put a basis and wrap
Exactly
around.
right. The building just can't be too big. It needs to be too big because the scale of this particular neighborhood is a small scale. That would be an example. Looking at the surrounding neighborhood or the historical, some building with Nantucket in mind, which is their guidance document, talks about different areas of the island and how those were originally created and what you're trying to maintain in terms of its integrity. So that would be an instance that they have to take that factual information, it's a big building, and apply why that isn't approvable, basically, with that criteria that I read to you from their act.
Right, gotcha.
Again, for George. You know, I'm just kind of thinking about what you've said. We're really to look at the procedures that the HDC used, and you quoted the language from the Act about, and really what I heard you say, it's really to this particular case. What I also heard, what I heard the appellant said, I could be wrong, is that he was suggesting the select board use this as an opportunity to remedy some ills that have been longstanding, perhaps, about the process of the HDC, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, I would.
His direction on that score.
I would recommend against basing your decision on those types of factors.
Thank you.
You're not here as an overall oversight committee to redo their procedures.
Thank you.
Take public comment.
Not anybody. I'm Caroline Ellis, and I'm on the Sconset Advisory Board. And I was at these different meetings that we have on Monday, and it was a surprise to us when a shed appeared that we didn't know about. And we were very concerned because it's the viewscape in Sconset that is so important, and that's what people protect, is the former, water tower, which was not a thing of beauty, but was sloping and gentle. And now we have this hedge, and we talked a great deal about landscape and retaining walls, which are abrupt in a previously slanting area. And in the final meeting, the applicant said that he was going to remove the shed. John was there, the Novaks were there, I was there, and he said he was going to remove the shed. So I don't know quite where the Sconset Advisory Board fits in with the HDC, but that's what I know. So thank you.
Can I ask one question, Ray? I think it's for you, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but I did notice that in the notes from the July 11th SOB meeting, that it said, thank you for moving the shed. And I'm just wondering if, by any chance, there was some confusion about what was actually decided at meeting.
Our meeting or Sconset?
So, in the notes from the Sconset Advisory Board that I believe went to the HDC before you made your final decision, it says, thank you for moving the shed, as opposed to thank you for removing the shed. And I'm just wondering if, by any chance, because it was so distinct that we're removing the shed, and then when it comes to you and there's a 5-0 vote to not, I'm just wondering if there's some confusion there, possibly? Or if you had a recollection.
I can't speak to what Sconset Advisory reviewed, because I wasn't participating in that. So I believe at that time, the shed had already been approved by our board. And John, please correct me if I'm wrong on this. Yes. So the shed had already been approved by our board.
Okay. Yeah.
And that now what we were concentrating on was the hardscape, the driveway and the retaining walls in particular. So, that's all I can tell you is, we, at the time we were reviewing the landscape, the shed was already a fait
approved.
accompli.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can just add to that. If you look at Exhibit 10 to our filing, that's the plan that was submitted to the Sconset Advisory Board, to which was just referred. And if you look at that, it includes a representation, a statement, remove the shed. And John was at that meeting. John's initials are here. He received the plan just as we all did, and the representation was made. I actually sent a letter which wasn't read at the HTC meeting, just as the SAB did, saying, thank you very much for removing the shed. Because he came in and that's what he represented, again, under oath to a town agency. And it was not removed.
Well, then the question becomes, would the decision be different if the shed had, would it be different if it was removed or not removed? Would the determination been different had the shed, you see what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting when you say that, because I want to refer back to what town council was saying. He said, well, was the misrepresentation relevant material to a decision that was made? And my answer is, if you look at the facts, absolutely. They filed the shed and they filed the hardscaping at the same time. And Mr. Wilsey said, I know the shed is an eyesore and won't be approved without screen planting. That's why they filed it, and it said screen planting on town property. And that's what the HDC had before it when it approved the shed. Now, it either approved the shed without any screening, which is a basis for overturning their decision, or it was relying on the false and misleading statement that there would be screening on town property to hide the shed. So it was directly relevant, it was directly material to a decision to approve the shed, the false and misleading information.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask you a question, Ray?
Now, can I respond to that?
Well, it's sort of in relation to that.
All right, go ahead.
Do you feel in either of these decisions like you and your board based them on any information that was incorrect?
No, absolutely not. And can I further elaborate? I want to make sure that everyone knows, okay, to repeat myself, the shed was approved. Then came the application for the hardscape. There was no discussion about the hardscape application being approved conditional on the removal of the shed that was previously approved. No discussion whatsoever. We were assuming that the shed had been approved and was going to be built. So that would have, the fact, if they removed the shed, fine. If the shed stayed there, also fine. We were on to a different subject, that subject being the hardscape. Thank you. Did I answer the question?
Would you have approved the shed without plantings?
I believe we did.
We did, yeah.
I'm just making sure that that's clear.
If I could clear that up, so both applications came in at the same time, the shed and the hardscaping. The shed was approved, I just saw June 5th, so about a month before the hardscaping. So that's kind of why it's important that both applications are there at the same time. Excuse me, I think, so the shed was already approved, but the HDC knew that the hardscaping was still there to base any vegetative screening or anything like that. I just want to clear up, that's why it's important, why those applications tracked together. So.
No other questions.
No questions for Jim? Anybody else? You ready to close the public hearing?
I am.
Board? So make sure the board doesn't have any other thoughts. Or I went too fast earlier. All right, good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm torn, you know. It's a really high I always find it's a very it's a very high standard. You know, we can't insert our own feelings into this. I have my own feelings about what's been built there and why, and, you know, but we can't insert that.
Substitute our judgment.
Yeah, we can't substitute our judgment. It's a very high standard, and that makes it very difficult. You know.
Mr. Toppin?
Can I just make one statement? Don Bracken is the engineer, and I'm sure when he's done doing his as-built, it's gonna match the final plan. There's no plan for that town property. Everything's on the Wilsey's property. There's nothing. Like, I don't know what he's saying. It's all truthful. Mr. Pohl knows me. John knows me. The plan is a plan. It's gonna match the registered plot plan, and it's all said and done. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to clear up about the Wisconsin Advisory Board meeting. They met on a Wednesday, which is out of order for them. It was kind of like a special meeting because I felt it was important that they did see the hardscaping before it came back to the HDC on a Thursday meeting. And as I stated, the shed had already been approved, and now I'm forgetting my train of thought about that. So yes, there was information presented at the Wisconsin Advisory Board that the shed would be removed. And that was, you know, good news apparently to the Wisconsin Advisory Boards for helping an approval for the hardscape. So, but I'm not quite sure. The shed would have been eliminating mass, but.
Well, then was the advisory board then, did they then look favorably upon the hardscaping and the plantings because the shed was removed, or did they not make a determination as an advisory board on that?
I think it was an appreciation that the shed was being removed. I'm not quite sure what it says.
But did they make any
appreciate shed being removed or something?
Yeah, but did they make any? Did they make any representations to the HDC after that point that impacted the HDC's decision?
Did the Wisconsin Advisory Board make comments? Yeah, they had written comments, and it said on there that it said appreciates, which Chairman Pohl read at the meeting.
Right.
That the shed would be removed. Let's see. I don't have that one, Erica. It was July 11.
Is it the SAB?
Yeah.
report?
Yeah, it's
Oh. Okay. Greatly appreciates moving shed. So that was the comment made at the meeting. So I
Moving,
don't know.
not removing.
Yeah.
Just say removing or moving?
Moving.
Moving.
Moving shed.
Okay, so we got,
And
it's not removing.
in a situation also like this, I vaguely might even remember saying, if that was the case, then he might continue the construction of the shed on the property and move the shed either somewhere on the property or move it off the property. So I wasn't sure at that point, but that seemed like an option as well too. So.
But the other factor of that application was 2 retaining walls that they rejected. They didn't want those. So we kind of took it as a whole that they didn't like anything. They wanted the grade to go from the house down to the street. They wanted grasses. One woman that actually said that privet shouldn't be planted on Nantucket. And even said that my client should sell and leave. I mean, it was really disheartening to go to the SHAB committee and hear those comments. They should be professional and talk about what is the application, what it's about. It was just unnerving. But in the end, that Wednesday meeting, they more or less rejected the entire plan. So no retaining wall and remove the shed or move the shed, whatever it was just, that was their decision.
Yeah, a lot of those comments I thought were really disheartening in terms of neighbors' behavior, and excuse me. I just felt in reading them, I was really disheartened by I'll use that term I used a couple weeks ago, the rancor.
This is the plan that was submitted. It's got John Hedden's initials on it on the 11th, and it says remove zoning shed, 10 by 7 and 3/4, 12 by 3/4. They represented that they would remove the shed. This was 24 hours before they revised it, took it to the HDC, and this was the representation of what they were going to take to the HDC. And if the HDC approved it, with this statement in here, the shed would have been removed.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ray, for HEC, or?
Just to clarify one more time that by July 11th, the shed was already approved, correct? Okay. June 5th. Okay.
But here, but I'll take devil's advocate for a second. But there are things that are approved that then get changed all the time. Some things that were changed in this process. So that, it's approved, but then you're bargaining and you're swapping some windows for something else to make it look right. You're bringing the roof pitch down and you're changing something that's already approved. So I think, so it could have gone either way. I mean, and I think my sense is it may have had my sense is, and I don't know that we could prove it, but it could have had a material impact. But,
Well, there are, there have been many alleged statements of facts tonight, and I can't sit here and really determine whether everything that has been purported as a statement of fact, especially by the appellant, but also by is really that. So I take that with a grain of salt.
If they're correct me if I'm interjecting, and I shouldn't be, but it would have been part of the motion that the shed had to be removed if that was an issue in terms of the retaining wall. The HDC often will say, okay, you're in with a new application, and if you want us to approve that, you've got to change this other thing, and it will be contingent on that. And that's a common practice for it. I mean, I did sit in those seats for a long time. So I just wanted to clarify
And those
that.
are really dynamic meetings, okay? And to sit and to even, I've said it and I'm not even sure what my frame of mind is, and I'm proposing something. So it's very, the things are flying pretty fast. And
So if we close the public hearing, can we still ask questions to the town council?
Yes, but you can't have anybody else.
Right, okay. Are we ready to close the public hearing?
One other question, just for the HTC. When you guys look at that, probably for Ray, when you look at that, when you look at the total package, let's say the landscaping, the position of the house, the position of the shed, and landscaping, do you feel that's in keeping with the remainder of that street? Do you feel that's in keeping with the houses across the street? Does it mimic the rest of that area to your satisfaction? Yes. Okay.
It's not on the mic.
Yeah, you have to go to the mic. I'm sorry.
I'm not the only one that feels that way because they did get approval, and I believe they were voted through unanimously, both of those decisions.
And so you included, in your thought process, you included all the aspects of it in that
Absolutely.
area? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, one more question, Ray. I just want to clarify as well the role of the Sconset Advisory Board, what they have to say is taken as a recommendation only.
And that's true of every advisory board. We have Nantucket Advisory, we have Sconset Advisory, we have Historic Structures Advisory, all of whom get together on a fairly regular basis. Now, occasionally they won't have a quorum, and so we don't get results from them. But when we do, we read them, and it's the first thing that I read before we even get into a discussion, so that everybody has the advisory board's point of view sort of in their mind when they're reviewing. So, but they're called advisory boards for a reason. It's if they were making the decision, they wouldn't come to us. We just vote them through. So we take in some of the comments, and others we dismiss, and that's the way it works. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So make a motion, we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Sure, second.
That would be both public hearings.
Both public.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, this is a time for the board to make a decision, to discuss among ourselves. We have town council answer any questions.
So what would a motion to uphold the appellant's position, and what would be a motion to deny it? I'd ask George to give us the wording of those.
Or is it to uphold the HEC?
Oh, that's what I'm asking. What is the motion that you?
Yeah, I would recommend some findings. If you're inclined to make, a motion would be, one motion may be motion to deny the appeal.
And uphold the HDC.
And yeah, denying the appeal does that. Or a motion to approve or to grant the appeal and overturn the certificates of appropriateness. If you were to do that, I would make some findings, of why, what the basis for that was. I have to note, it will be an extreme hardship to me if I don't make that 9:20 vote. So, seriously, for tomorrow morning. So
You need to go now.
I don't mean to be disrespectful to the board, but if you could, if you're anticipating a long deliberations discussion or further questions from me, maybe continue your deliberations to your, I'm going to be down here about 800 times in the next couple of months with other things that involve Nantucket, so I'm sure I can come back.
It's all fresh. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ready to take some action now, unless you actually have to walk out the door now. But
I'd get him out the door to make the vote.
Yeah, go make the vote.
Okay. All
May
right.
I make one note? Normally, this is just how we've done it in the past. If you do grant the appeal, you do need to make the findings, and then we have town council draft
Okay.
a written decision. That
Okay.
decision is
Okay.
brought back to the
Okay.
select board
All
to
right.
vote
Okay.
on,
All right.
to be finalized.
Okay.
If
Good.
we approve the appeal.
If you uphold,
Either way.
you uphold the appeal.
If we uphold the appeal. Okay.
Okay.
Or either way.
If you deny the appeal and uphold the HDC, we just issue a standard
Okay.
memo to the,
Okay.
to
All
the,
right.
to that effect.
Okay.
That doesn't need to come back.
All right, so this is where we
Um,
motion and go from there.
Well, maybe talk about findings too. I mean,
We would do that in the motion.
Yeah.
Or
But my comments on the findings are, I find the HDC, I found nothing in the appellant's argument that would lead me to do anything but uphold the appeal. I felt that I learned a lot about the process. I've heard about those deadlines. Knowing that they are kind of an office deadline was helpful for me. I really felt that from listening to the chair that there was a very deliberative process, that regardless of what plantings were here or there, that it was, I just was very, very impressed by the level of, ability, of the HDC in terms of their process.
Did you mean uphold the HDC? Did you say uphold the appeal?
I'm giving some findings that and I would make the motion that we deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the HDC.
Okay, sorry, I was just looking for clarification.
I would make that motion.
is there a second for discussion?
I'll second it, and I just wanted to say, it's a really high standard that we have to find, and it's the two things that obviously council outlined. I mean, it would have to be, their decision would have to be based completely on misleading information. I mean, I think of like if someone said a house was built in 1980 and it was really built in 1880, and they issued a demolition, not knowing. That would be, and then I feel like the HDC would be here saying, yes, please overturn our decision, not saying, please uphold our decision. I mean, I really appreciate the neighbors' concern, and obviously the history of the Holgate household. I actually have the wash tub, the original wash tub that she used to wash laundry in. And changing neighborhoods are really hard, and this one definitely sticks a lot out of the ground, but the other part is I can't substitute my opinion for that of the HDC. If maybe I don't particularly love what they approved, because their process is very thorough and they put in a lot of hours, and I think that they did very fairly deliberate and make some changes to this application before that they approved it.
May I ask a question just on the motion? It was motion to deny the appeal. Can I assume that's appeals?
Appeals, yes.
Thank you.
I want to echo Dawn's sentiments, particularly on understanding the neighbors' concerns and, again, not substituting our own opinion for HDC. One thing I do think, though, is that I think sometimes there is, with the false and misleading, it's difficult to prove. People often unintentionally do things on town land and have to go back and rectify them, whether it's post-installation or during the HDC process. So I think to really make the case that someone did it knowingly and intentionally would be very difficult. And I think, if anything, maybe that's something over time we can improve as a process and understanding and clarify it for applicants. But yeah, I would echo Dawn's sentiments otherwise.
I think for me, I was really trying to see if I could determine if there was fraudulent information that altered or changed the HCC decision, and I didn't see that. I had questions about the SCON's advisory board role in all this, and if they had, I think in 2014, you mentioned that similar things have happened. You push things through on a timely basis, so that the procedures weren't whimsical or unreasonable, right? And I don't think the decision was arbitrary, unreasonable, or whimsical. So if I look at the decision and the procedures, I don't think they were arbitrary and capricious. That's what we're basing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure they are either, because the standard is so high. I do think that, my own, I'm gonna probably vote and uphold it, but and partly because when we've sent it back before, we've just muddled it and made a mess of it. If there is legal standing and it goes further, then those findings are out of our hands. And so I think, so that's one consideration. The other one is I would like to see, I would like to improve it so the HDC's position is in writing in our packet. I think that would be helpful to get that in writing and have it as part of the documents in the future, because I think sometimes it's difficult, at least for me, to follow. We're asking questions, we're trying to see, we've got the appellant, but we're trying to follow you guys, and, I just think it would be, it'd be a little bit better practice. And then this isn't to do with this hearing, but I think the town, part of, I think, why we're here is that the town, I believe the water company, sold a piece of property that was for about half price. And I was part of doing the same thing at Massaquet. We got kind of snookered. And I just think it's, if something is subdividable and the town, to one of the town boards, they should, if we want it subdivided, we should subdivide it and benefit as a town, rather than sell it for half price and have whoever buys it benefit. And if we don't want it to be subdivided and two little houses shoehorned in, then maybe we should say no subdivision of this and sell it for half price. So, I think that, when I look at what's happening sort of in some of these areas, that's part of what's happening, is we're trying to put too much into too small a space. So, and I can't put that in, that's not part of the record, that's just a general, or it is part of the record, it's a general comment about the town doing its due diligence and selling things for what they're worth. But, unfortunately, that's not your purview, it's not why we're here. But I think that's part, but I think it led to why we're here. So.
I just add, I thought the appellant's documentation and arguments were very specific, right on the mark, and we didn't have that same, as you said, on the HDC side. And I know it's extra work, but going through all of those copies of things we got and trying to crosswalk it just got to be overwhelming. So it would be helpful to have some kind of a summary.
Written summary.
Yeah.
From the HDC.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's been done in the past.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments for the record? Okay. So we have a second on the motion to deny the appeals and uphold the HDC. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I need something other than